Hi, my name's Rich Harrington, and welcome to this course on artificial intelligence and photography. We're going to explore several different techniques and technologies that can improve your workflow. To start, we'll take a look at how technology is impacting photography, and what way it's making a change on the photography industry. We'll then take a look at using artificial intelligence when it comes to raw and source photos. In this case, what we're discussing is how the raw files themselves can be enhanced before developing, or how source images can be used to influence things like search. We'll then take a look at some AI technology built into Adobe Photoshop that can be used for things such as filling in missing areas, removing blemishes, or making changes to faces or complex selections to allow you to further refine a photograph. We'll then explore some third-party tools, including some from Skylum software, taking a look at their Luminar and Aurora HDR products and how AI plays a role in the photo developing process. We'll then move on to taking a look at tools from EyeQ. This includes the Perfectly Clear line of products that are used in both photo labs and by those working on their own individual computers and even smartphones. And then we'll discuss Topaz Labs, which offers a variety of plugins and applications that can influence your workflow. AI is a quickly growing and changing area, so the technology we're exploring here will certainly continue to evolve and improve. But I think what you'll see is that it can have a huge impact on your workflow, saving you time and unlocking new creative possibilities. In order to get the most out of this class, it would be helpful if you have a basic understanding of digital imaging. We're going to use Adobe Photoshop as our hub for much of this course, but by no means do you need to be a Photoshop expert or even use Photoshop. Most of the tools we're going to discuss are available as standalone applications or as plugins to multiple products. What we're looking for here is that you feel comfortable working with digital images, that you're familiar with things like opening files, closing, saving, zooming in to check details. If you are, then this class will be much more useful to you. But in any case, it's an overview of the technology. We'll explore general concepts as well as specific tools within these different applications and plugins. You don't need to have all of these or even any of them to start. You can watch this course and learn quite a bit about what's available and then decide how you want to take action. But I do encourage you to download these tools, including the demo versions, so you can try them all out. Each of these AI tools bears slightly different results, and you might prefer one over another. There is some unique features in each of them, as well as a little bit of overlap. So which one you choose, or multiple ones that you choose, are really a personal choice. So I would encourage you to go ahead and download the exercise files, as well as consider downloading the current demo versions of the products that we're going to discuss in this course. This includes those products available from Skylum, Luminar, and Aurora, as well as Perfectly Clear, available from EyeQ or Athentech, the AI Suite from Topaz Labs, and a current version of Photoshop. If your membership includes it, I've put together a collection of exercise files to help you really discover how these technologies work. In this case, I've drawn upon many different photographers who are willing to share their work, so I kindly ask that you respect their copyright. You can use these images for practice purposes, but please don't post the results to social media or add them to your portfolio. In some cases, we'll remove the pauses in the video because some of these AI tools do take a few minutes to process the images. So you might want to pause the video if you're following along hands-on. These files will really help bring the skills to life and ensure that you know how to get the most out of these different applications and plugins. Go ahead and download the files, make sure your software is up to date, and I'll share a little bit of background information on artificial intelligence before we begin. Before we explore specific tools, I'd like to take a moment to discuss the concept of AI. When I talk to a lot of creative professionals, especially photographers, there's definitely a fear about what AI is and what it isn't. Think of it this way. AI is technology designed to help you. Now, it's not like a scary movie with Skynet where the robots are going to come and take over the world. Rather, it's just technology that can speed up your workflow. Now, that's not to say that there aren't a few things that are pretty amazing about AI. And if it was used incorrectly, sure, anything's possible, even those sci-fi movies. But let's explore what AI is and is not. So what exactly is artificial intelligence? Well, artificial intelligence is a collection of technologies, and essentially it's a theory and a development process used within computer systems. What happens here is the computer is able to perform tasks that normally required human intelligence. This can include things such as visual perception, recognizing objects, or making a selection within an image. It can also include speech recognition or making decisions about how to process an image. It can also offer things like translating between one language and another. Now you might be thinking, well, I don't need AI. Well, you probably already use it. If you've ever clicked the auto button inside a software, it's analyzed the image and made a decision. This was early generation technology, and it's certainly improved with many different new techniques, which we'll talk about in a moment. But even if you've put your camera into aperture priority mode or shutter priority mode, you're taking advantage of an algorithm inside that device. The camera looks at the scene, evaluates what's there, takes a few measurements, and then calculates the results and drives the settings on the camera, determining things like the ISO or other settings like aperture or shutter speed for you. Well, in this case, AI or program is assisting you based upon some control that you've specified. So how exactly does photo software leverage AI? Well, it can be used in several ways. One method is image awareness. In this case, it's able to look at the content and be aware with what is there, detecting faces, for example, when calculating exposure. It's quite useful for things like masking, where it's able to go in, look and detect edges so we can add transparency or make complex selections. It's often used for upscaling, taking lower quality photos that need to be enlarged. These days, as we see higher resolution screens, advancements in computer technology, print output, and other needs that some of our early digital images weren't originally intended for, it becomes necessary to often enlarge that content and make it look better. AI can definitely help here by analyzing and often predicting to create new pixels to replace the ones that are missing. It's also useful for making selective adjustments without you having to make the selection. In other words, being able to just adjust the sky or the skin within an image without having to first click or paint to make a complex selection. It can also create suggested values. By analyzing the image, it can put the initial settings in for the sliders or the controls, which you of course are free to override, but it saves you from having to think about every single decision, which speeds up the editing process. And it can also offer simplified user interfaces. Instead of having to have an overwhelming amount of controls to drive selections, view the mask, refine the edges, etc., we can just click on single buttons or make a basic selection and have the computer automatically refine it. So you might be wondering, why is this change happening? Well, there are several factors, including the fact that computers are getting more and more powerful, particularly things like the GPU units, which can really enhance the processing of graphics information. So what's driving this? Well, simply put, some of the things we're seeing is reduced budgets. People have to get more done with less. This means a need to be more productive with fewer human resources. We're also seeing global competition. The economy is now on a global scale. And so the rates in which people work in different markets is more challenging. People in more expensive areas of the world have to compete with people that might have less expense. And so finding ways to use technology to cut down on time and effort is really important. We're also facing a less trained workforce. As the need for more and more digital content continues to rise, the people creating it, processing it, and publishing it don't have the benefit of all of the formal training that some of the early adopters did. This might mean that they haven't had the benefit of a college education or advanced degrees or training in the subject in which they have to work. Technology can make things easier for them and allow them to make the right decisions with less chance of error. This also adds consistency. Through the process of automation, it's often easier to see consistent results or have a double check on images. And it leads to reduced time being spent, even if you are a professional. Less time Related to AI, you'll often hear the phrase machine learning. What does this mean? How can we teach a machine to think? Well, it's a complex process, but one that's useful to understand. What exactly is machine learning? Well, what it comes down to is machine learning is a type of AI where the computer system is able to learn from data rather than programming it. By showing it lots of information and giving it details about that data, it could start to learn what is right or wrong when making the decision. For example, it's possible to train AI to recognize the differences between a dog and a cat. So when you show it photos or video of the subject, it's able to correctly pick what is what. It doesn't mean it's perfect every time, but with more and more training, the accuracy goes up. But this training does involve people. It's not a simple process, and you have to build these algorithms. So typically what happens is companies will get a lot of before and after images to show the program where things start and what the desired outcome is. This produces a model that can then be combined with additional new inputs that leads to outputs or results. I've been involved in training AI for a few different companies. What typically happens is we feed in lots of images that have been retouched or developed by professional photographers or image retouchers. We show the computer thousands of images, including the before and afters, and it starts to analyze those and learn what sort of changes are considered desirable. Then we look at the outcomes, and we might notice that it's not quite right. So tweaks can be made by feeding in additional inputs or tweaking the algorithm for the results that we want. Effectively, teaching a computer to think, and to do so consistently. Really what this comes down to is things like this, being able to teach the AI to recognize things like acne, and then what it should do about it when it encounters it in a photograph. You might be thinking this sounds strange or you'd never use it, but chances are you already do. If you're using junk mail filters, Well, that's a type of AI. And you may have noticed that sometimes it gets it wrong, so you move it out of the junk folder or add it to your address book, training it that this is a message that you want to receive. Other times, it might miss something and you add it to the junk mail filter. This sort of training is how you teach the software to make the right decisions. And it's really something that you've probably become dependent upon, especially if you get a lot of email. But it could be more complex than this and take a look at more elaborate scenarios. As you see here, there's the image on the before for the left and the after on the right. In this case, both skin and some portrait enhancements have been made. You'll notice that some of the scarring for the acne on the face has been alleviated, the eyes have been brightened and sharpened, and the dark circles under the eyes have been removed. This sort of technology can span across multiple types of images, being able to work on different genders and ethnicities correctly by giving it plenty of training and input models. This sort of thing can be really useful because it I want to show you a piece of technology that I've personally worked on. I've served as an image consultant to both Athentech, now known as EyeQ, and Skylum software, and I've been involved in helping their product teams bring AI to life. What I want to show you here is a piece of technology that's truly amazing, even to me, and I've seen it built from the ground up. This is the ability to enhance skies within a photograph. In this example, we're going to talk about how AI can be used to make very complex selections and complicated adjustments, but easy. The role of artificial intelligence is if it's done correctly, it can do the heavy lifting for you. By training the neural network, it's able to detect the sky and other objects in the sky, and then create a series of complex masks to isolate those. Masks lead to selections or image segmentation. This allows the individual areas to be enhanced individually. Now, this can be done very complex where you have lots of controls, or by taking advantage of AI, it can be really simplified. This allows for the adjustment of the sky without getting halos or glows that you typically see when making a shadow highlight adjustment, or noise when making an HSL adjustment. Skies can have richer detail, but still look natural looking. So how exactly does this work? Well, here we have a shot of a bridge, and the green indicates how the computer has detected critical edges along the details here in the sky and the bridge, including all the spaces in between. This sky detection and object recognition helps identify different areas, such as water, clouds, sky. Luminar analyzes the image and detects the sky areas, and then it takes a look and is able to make suggestions based upon what it's learned from looking at hundreds of thousands of other photos of skies that have been properly developed. Then it can create masks. What you're seeing here is key elements being cut apart, such as the clouds being separated from the blue sky, and a transition area being set to help mix them together. This is semantic segmentation. Effectively, the image is analyzed, and then it starts to separate it into different pieces and layers. It looks at this based upon the content, including things like water, vegetation, humans, etc. This allows for quick adjustments and avoids some of the halos that are typically associated when you adjust bright areas in an image. As you see, it creates an essential mask, and those areas are cut out. It defines all of the key elements and identifies tone. The network is effectively being used and has learned from several real-life examples. So, as you see, those areas are identified, then split apart and isolated. Once that's done, they can be refined and adjusted with accurate selections. Using a single slider, it's able to enhance the sky and bring out those details. As you see here, the two AI adjustments were used, and it allowed for proper exposure and proper enhancement. When it comes to artificial intelligence, there are concerns about security and privacy, and many of those are well-founded. Should you be concerned about privacy when it comes to AI? Well, the answer is yes. First up, one of the things that's challenging is getting the AI to forget once you've trained it. For example, if we've fed in a lot of images into the AI, several portraits that have been retouched, and then a person decides that they don't want their images to be used, well, it's difficult to effectively cauterize that memory or cut it out of the brain. It's burned in, it's part of the logic, and it's been built upon. This doesn't mean that it's all in there and can be tied back to the individual that was the source, but it does mean that the data was used. This gets a little tricky because all of it becomes part of a network, and the data all mixes together. So it's important that when companies are training their neural networks, that they have proper release forms and permission in order to use this information. What's important here is that you pay attention when you are opting in and how your data might be exploited. There's been many high-profile cases of very large companies taking advantage of data on your camera roll or that you've posted to their social networks that they've used to train their algorithms to better serve you and suggest products that you purchase or trips that you take or look at what your friends are posting to make suggestions. This sort of area is pretty gray. Fortunately, when it comes to photo software, things are much clearer cut. The companies that are making these plugins are rarely using any of your content to influence. Rather, they've worked with professional photographers and retouchers, licensed hundreds of thousands of images to train the neural network. And all of those images have release forms and permissions. So you don't have to worry about your content being used. I would encourage you, though, to always read the terms of service. For example, if you're uploading images to an image sharing site or to a stock photography company, you may find that those images are being fed into a database to train the AI. Usually it's anonymously, and they're not taking information like the name of the people and other things, but it is important, if this matters to you, that you read the terms of service. Generally, most of these technologies are doing face detection and not recognition. Face detection means that the software identifies the face, finding the eyes, the nose, the mouth, not that the face belongs to a particular individual. This means that it can recognize areas so that they can be refined, but no personal information is being exchanged or sent back to the manufacturer. Additionally, if there is training that's happening, it's usually done locally. For example, when you're creating a mask, the ability to add or subtract brushstrokes to help influence how the mask is generated. Most of the training, though, is already done before you get the software, and it's done during the development stage. This is never released to you, and all of the data is kept safe and proprietary. You just benefit from the end results of that data to drive the software tool. So, for the most part, with these commercially available products, you really have The first AI technology we're going to explore is a new ability to work with RAW files. Now, RAW files are traditionally using a Bayer sensor and are then processed by the computer, and the image is simply decoded. But Adobe has added a new step when you're using the Adobe Camera Raw engine that's optional, but may add some additional benefits. I'm going to select both images here and choose to open in Adobe Camera Raw. Now, with the file selected, you can right-click or click on this small menu here and choose Enhanced Details. Now, this is a very subtle adjustment, and it's not going to work on all photos. It also creates a new image on your hard drive, so use it sparingly, except when you need the most detail in an image. Now what it does is it analyzes the image, and it's attempting to enhance it. If you click, you can see the before and after. It's very subtle, but when you click Enhance, a new image is generated and then automatically nested next to the original. It'll be a new DNG file, and it has the extension Enhanced on it. So you can see there, Enhanced to Sony RAW, versus Enhanced to -Enhanced DNG. So this is a new file. You can batch process these, just select multiple images, but it will skip the preview step. When you click Enhance, it does generate a new file. And for things like landscape photography or product photography, when you're using a really tight focus, you will be able to see some of these things in the critical areas. In any case, when it's done, the DNG file is easy to open. Just click through, and it will open like any RAW file and gives you the ability to continue processing the image in the tool of choice. When working inside of Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom, the Auto button recently got an upgrade. Now, I know that might sound strange. Auto should just be automatic, right? But what happens now is that it's calculating a new recipe based upon the contents of the scene. Adobe uses its Sensei engine, looks at the image, and makes suggestions on an analysis of the content of that photo to try to get a better one-click fix. Let me show you. I'll just select two images here and double-click to take them into Photoshop. They open first into the Adobe Camera Raw dialog. Now, in this particular scene, looking at the image, you see the histogram. Notice how the highlights are kind of underexposed and a bit washed out. We have a lot of clogging here in the shadow region and in the blacks. With one click on the Auto button, watch how the histogram was better redistributed. And if we turn on the clipping indicators, you'll see that the clipping has been minimized. Now, I'll turn that back, and you see that there's still some clipping in the blacks, and then with a click, there's a fix. Now, clipping, the red and blue, was turned on by clicking on these small triangles. That indicates where there's areas that are too bright or too dark for printing purposes. You can leave these for screen. It just indicates a slight crush. I still recommend a fine tweak, though. So with just a little recovery here on the white point, if I slightly back that off, you see how that cloud is recovered, and we lose some of that crushed detail. A little bit is okay. And if we do the same thing on the black point here, I can lift that slightly, and it recovers. So auto is really optimized for a screen workflow, but you might need to make slight tweaks if you intend to do printed output. Let's take a look at another image here. In this case, we've got a long exposure. And with long exposures, you end up with areas that might get a little bit too bright or might lack contrast. This is a long exposure of a flowing river. Well, I'm going to fix that. You see here, we got the clipping indicators turned on for both the shadows and the highlights. And when I click auto, watch the change. It was subtle, but we had an increase here. Let's take that back. Notice how the details have been evened out a bit. Now still, you might need to play a little bit with your black point or further refine your shadows if you're concerned about that. A little bit of clipping is okay. You'll also notice that it moved the texture value, clarity, and dehaze. Those had been manually set on the file. But when you do this auto exposure, take advantage of those sliders too. This will affect the appearance of the richness of the shadows. So let's go ahead here and do a total reset on the image. And we'll take texture and clarity and dehaze all the way down. And you see the overall histogram to start. Now I'll click the auto button, and you see how it's redistributed. And I like that. It's looking good. The only issue is that the water is not quite as dynamic as I would like. So this is where that texture and clarity comes into play. Now, as you adjust, be careful not to overdo it. You see there that texture works nicely. Clarity, on the other hand, is really spiking the colors in the shadows and the highlights. You see those little spikes there happening at the end and the clipping goes on? There's the clipping for the black and the highlights right there. So be careful not to overdo it on those two sliders. If you're a graphic designer or you need additional images to work with your project, many folks will turn to stock image sites. And more of those sites are now allowing for visual search. In fact, so does Google Images. You can upload a photograph and it will use that to influence the search. Let me show you what Adobe did using their own stock photography site and library to help train it. If we go to stock.adobe.com, you'll see in the search area, we can click here on the camera icon and choose an image. Let's go ahead and upload this image here, Red Panda. It's going to analyze this and attempt to find similar results. It really did pretty well. It didn't suggest any raccoons, for example, because this is a panda and not a raccoon. And I notice as I scroll through, tons of options here. It's matching all attributes. But maybe I just am concerned about the subject matter, the content. Well, now it's going to narrow that down a little bit and not worry so much about the composition, but show me more options of a red panda in different scenarios. Or maybe I'm just concerned about the composition. In this case, it's going to find only images that are similarly composed. Maybe this is a photograph I didn't have the rights to, but it was something that my client was interested in. Now I could find similarly composed photographs. Or we could just search based on color and find other things that are related to the color palette, opening up new options for design. For example, uploading a source material and then looking for other choices that you can use for complementary designs. Let's try again here. This time, we're going to upload a photograph of a museum. Here, it's a little bit more abstract. The program is not as definitively trained since it's not just a single animal species. But what I see here is it's gone through and has found content that's similar in lighting. Lots of archways and pillars. Well, that's good. If I wanted to have a very similar shot composition, I can narrow it down. And now you see we have lots of images with a strong central arch and things branching off to the sides. Again, we can go based on content only, and it's going to limit it, or color. And so this gives us different attributes that we can use. Similarly, we can upload this and tell it that we want to search for videos. What it's going to do now is find video content based upon the still content. And I can tell it to look for just the content area here. It's not able to deal with composition because video has movement, but you see that it's found videos that are more similar to my reference still shot. This type of AI search is a big time saver. Rather than having to figure out how to describe content, you can just show the content to the computer. And you'll find this on many stock imagery sites. It's not just used for this sort of images. You can upload fonts. Adobe has many different content-aware technologies, and this content-aware is really another way of saying AI. Photoshop is analyzing the content that's in the image as it makes a recommendation on what to do. Let's start with a popular one, which is content-aware fill. In this case, I want to remove an object from the photograph so that we have just an empty scene here so I can composite something else into the scene. I'm going to take advantage here and just click Select Subject. It's going to analyze the scene and try to decide what was worth selecting. In this case, it latched in on two different areas. So let's just subtract this knot here and have just the strawberry. In order to really use this technology, I generally suggest that you expand the selection a little bit. We'll choose Select, Modify, Expand, and push that out a few pixels. If it doesn't look big enough, you can push that out a couple of times so that it's a bigger selection. Now choose Edit, Content-Aware Fill. This brings up a new dialog where you can define where Photoshop should look for the pixels. It's going to use AI to suggest it. In the past, Photoshop would just calculate this for you, and if you didn't like it, you could run it again to get new results. Now, the AI calculates it for you, but you can influence it by telling it which areas to include or not include. As you see here, it's analyzed the image and come up with a suggestion. The green areas are areas that are going to be used. If I don't want it to use part of this, I can just drag here to remove, and it's not used in the selection. Additionally, you can adjust how much the color adapts, and you'll see that this creates new options as the pixels are chosen. I'm going to go with standard here, the default settings, and that looks good, and tell it to rotate as needed. Well, it did pretty well there, but let's go back to normal, and the lines look a lot better and automatically lined up in the focused and defocused areas. Now, what we can do here is if we want, we can influence this. So if I don't want these defocused pixels to be included, I could just paint them out, and it's not going to use those as it calculates new texture. You see it redraws. Maybe I wanted to spend more time looking at just this area here, and it recalculates. But we do need a little bit of blurred pixels here, so I'll be sure to paint those in near the stem, so it analyzes. And you see that gives better results. When you're ready, you can choose to output to the current layer, overwriting the existing pixels, a new layer, which puts just the results on its own layer with transparency, or a duplicate layer, which I prefer. In this case now, we have the original down below, and the new one layered on top. Additionally, you'll find Content Aware available in other tools. For example, if I take the healing brush or spot healing brush, you'll see that Content Aware is an option. Now what we can do is just paint on an area that we don't want, and it will analyze surrounding pixels to come up with new ones. It's not quite as elaborate as Content-Aware Fill, but you see it did work nicely. If I wanted to minimize this shadow, for example, I can just brush over it, and it's going to look in the surrounding areas and try to come up with new ones. If I want to be more specific, I could choose the Healing Brush tool. So now I can Option or Alt-click and use a tool much like Clone. Now I can see a preview and watch the pixels come in. And when you let go, it's going to analyze and attempt to blend. Now, let's undo for a second there. We'll use the replace method here. Tell it to use sampled, but give it a softer edge to the brush. There we go. Now, as we blend and we release, it's going to do a more natural job and start to mix those together nicely. So, in any case, this technology can be quite useful. Be sure to explore it and take advantage of the content-aware options. Let's switch back here to the spot healing brush, and I'll just brush a little more there. And with quick analysis, it's taken it out. One of my favorite styles of photography is panoramic photography, where you capture a very large image to help somebody see a scenic overlook or to get a sense of what it's like to travel to another country. In this case, several photographs are typically stitched together. This allows you to capture a really wide vista, and then Photoshop will assemble the pieces. Now, Adobe offers a couple of different ways of doing this, but one of the methods does take advantage of content-aware fill. Let me show you. I'll navigate to a folder of source images here and select all of these, and I can now choose to merge them. You'll notice if you look carefully that there's overlap. For example, here's this building, and it appears again. Here's this divot in the bay, and you see it here. So these images have at least 25% overlap. In this case, I wasn't shooting from a tripod, but was handheld. So if I choose to merge these, there may be some issues that it has to fix. What we'll do is choose the auto method, and I'll choose to blend the images together so they smoothly line up. I can also choose to fix any geometric distortion and use content aware to fill in the transparent areas. When you shoot a panorama and you pivot, what naturally happens is that the areas near the edges are going to have transparency. This is because of the curvature, and typically the way around this is to straighten the image afterwards or to use cloning or cropping to add pixels or tighten the image up. But with content aware, we often don't have to do as much cloning or cropping. Let's click OK. Photoshop is going to open up each of those source images and load them into one document. In this case, I'm using lower quality photographs, so it'll work faster for you. But this does work on very high-res images as well. It then analyzes it and stitches them together. Where you see the marching ants there, those are the pixels that were calculated. Let's turn the top layer off so you can see the content-aware fill. In this case, you can see how each picture was curved a bit in order to keep the straight horizon. And then as they were stitched together, we ended up with some gaps. Well, content-aware fill analyzed those gaps and filled it in. If we zoom in here, you'll see, of course, that easy areas like the sky are, of course, filled in. But as we get down here towards the bottom, even relatively complex areas were handled correctly. And we see that things like the buildings were cloned and repeated and filled in. Now, this one right here looks a little strange, like we have the top of a building that's not connecting to the buildings underneath, so it's not always perfect. You may decide to crop a little bit or grab your own clone stamp tool or even the spot healing brush, and you might paint over an area that you wanted to try again with, like that. And you see that it easily filled that in. So it's not going to be perfect, but it was a huge time saver. It was able to calculate a large amount of missing pixels and easily fill those in so that I have a larger full-resolution panoramic photo, minimizing any cropping or image loss. Now, this works great for most types of panoramic photography. There is another workflow of using raw files and making a DNG. That's all. Photoshop has a useful tool called Liquify that allows you to move pixels around as if they were putty. Now, when used correctly, it can be used for subtle enhancements to a portrait, such as turning up the corners of the mouth for a gentle smile, or lifting the nose slightly. Think of it as lightweight plastic surgery. Now, if you overdo it, it's really obvious, but a light touch works well. Let's open up a JPEG here into Photoshop, and I'll invoke Liquify. Before doing, though, I suggest converting for smart filters so that you can re-edit the results. Now, we'll choose Liquify. Photoshop analyzes and finds the face. As you see here, it was able to detect key areas in the face, such as the mouth, the nose, the eyes, etc. Let's go ahead and link the eyes so that as we make adjustments to one, the other will change. I've zoomed in a little bit here, so it's easier to see, and we can maximize this window. Let's hold down the spacebar and pan down. And that grid is just to help you see what's happening. You can turn that off if you want under the View menu. Let's go ahead here and open up the eyes just a little bit. You see that we can size them to make them just a little bigger. This way, it looks like there's less of a squint from the flash photography. We can go ahead and adjust them, open and closed. And you'll see those changes are happening because we linked them. We can slightly rotate the eyes. In this case, I'm just going to set that back to 0. Now, as we mouse over other areas, you see changes. For example, we can slightly thin the nose. Maybe the wide-angle lens was making it look broader. We can come to the corners of the mouth here and turn it up for a gentle smile, or even down for less of a smile. You can't make somebody frown, but it does make a simple change. Now, if you look here, you see that there's the values. And those are capped between plus 100 and negative 100. So if this is something you decide you want to do for comical effect, you may have to run the filter a few times. But a gentle curve there on the smile definitely starts to add to that smile and makes it look natural. We can also go ahead and easily take the face here, shortening the chin a little bit, and doing a little bit of contouring there to compensate for the lens. Let's zoom out, and if I toggle the preview box on and off, you can see how we just lifted the cheeks slightly and turned up the corners of the mouth. When I click OK, that change is applied to the photograph. Now, if you ever need to, since it's a smart filter, just double-click and you're right back in. So if you decide that something was a little too much, it's not a big deal. We can go ahead, for example, and just back off that chin height and the jawline to slightly lower values, and click OK, and it updates. Now, you can just toggle that on and off, and you see how we just lifted the cheeks ever so slightly to Photoshop offers a command that can analyze a photograph and try to determine what's most important. It's the select subject command. It's not just for people. It's going to attempt, based upon focus and composition, to choose what is the subject of a photograph and make a basic selection. This can then drive other adjustments that you make. Let's open up two pictures here, and you'll see with the Photoshop document that we made a couple of selections. One to brighten up our subject, and then darken and desaturate the background. Well, normal color selections would be pretty tough here. We have tannish skin with brownish hair on a tannish and brown backdrop. Well, this gets a little tough. Let's go ahead here. You'll see that we have Select Subject. It's going to analyze the photograph and attempt to make a selection. Now what we can do is click Select and Mask. Now before you do this, my suggestion is choose Auto Enhance. This will attempt to improve the edges for you automatically. Now we could choose Select Mask and choose how we view this. For example, onion skin shows it over transparency. Now, by default, not perfect, but if we turn up the edge detection here, it's going to start to analyze and find those edges a bit better. We can also use a smart radius to clean that up if we want, and you see it does a little better. Now what's necessary is just paint. So if we start to subtract here, hold down the Option key, you see it cleaned up that edge. Or I could just paint normally here, and it removes it. It's not going to be perfect, nor does it need to be exactly perfect here, since all we're trying to do is make a targeted selection to adjust our subject. But with these other adjustments here, such as smooth and a little bit of contrast, we can tighten that up. Again, feel free to paint on the subject as you see fit, adding or subtracting, and it will improve this overall selection. Let's go ahead and turn down the edge detection there a little bit, and instead, just paint on the edges of the hair. You see there, it's actually reanalyzing that zone with transition and attempts to find the hair and create the transparency that's needed. That works nicely. And so by just painting where you know the hair was, you can refine that. If you want to see that, you can look at it as an overlay as well, which kind of helps you understand the mask. This way, you could paint on areas like the hair for a smooth transition, and you see it gets nice ramp transparency. Now what I'm going to do is just feather that a little bit and output that to a selection. This makes it easy to take advantage of our adjustments. For example, let's click Curve, and then I'll Option click on the word Auto. Now I could tell it to fix the per channel contrast and snap midtones, for example, or just enhance light and dark. And you see that it makes it easy with the different methods to change how auto is calculated. In this case, brightness and contrast was enough. A very small change here, and we get a nice change to the skin tone. If I toggle that on and off, you see just a subtle lift. Let's reload that selection, select, reselect, and now we'll put a little vibrancy into just the skin, getting a nice rich skin tone, like so. We can load it again, reselect, and choose inverse. Now let's add another adjustment for curves, and simply darken our background down, or lighten it up. And you see that we can easily change that area. I like that, and we'll reselect it again, and this time just tone down the intensity of color. Reselect it again, and I'll add a hue adjustment, and I could change the color of the backdrop very subtly, or click Colorize, and dial in a color and the intensity of saturation, making that backdrop a little bit bluer so his skin tone's really cut. Drive the lightness in. And since it's an adjustment layer, I can mix that in with opacity to refine it, so it's a very subtle effect. Now, if we look at this, that selection was really accurate. This made it very simple to do a targeted adjustment. And then change the background so that our subject stood out much better. Now, instead of tan and brown skin tones on a tan and brown backdrop, we have In Photoshop 2020, Adobe unveiled a new tool to select objects, and it's really a replacement for other methods. In the past, you might have relied upon things like the Magic Wand tool, which allowed you to click and it would make a basic selection, and you can continue to tweak the settings. Adobe then expanded this to the Quick Selection tool, which allows you to drag through an image to try to make an even better selection. But now, they've replaced those tools, or at least demoted them, and have added the Object Selection tool. What you can now do is drag around an object, and it's going to determine what's the primary area. In this case, it picked up the shadow a little bit, so you can subtract that. Just hold down the Option key, and it will attempt to remove, and it will recalculate. Let's try another object here, such as these leaves. There we go. And I'll hold down the Shift key and drag around this leaf, and you see it adds that too. This makes it really simple to go through and find objects, and you don't even have to be perfect when you make those selections. So in this case here, I'm just dragging on the leaves, and you see they begin to become selected because we have not completely selected the oranges. And so with that drag, it uses its intelligence to try to guess what it is you wanted to select. And pretty quickly, it builds up a relatively accurate selection, and you can keep adding and dragging as needed. So for example, with that selection, let's add a curves adjustment here, and we'll take the on-image tool and just do a little lift. And you see that we added light to just the green vegetation there, helping those stand out, which was useful. Now what I want to do is make a selection on an orange. So let's grab one of these. There we go. And we'll just make a basic selection here around one of the oranges. And you see it finds it pretty well. This tool is designed to just look at the image and attempt to isolate things. Once it's done, you can choose the Select and Mask command and take advantage of things like Smart Radius, so it reanalyzes and recalculates. Feel free to use those, and then just output that to a selection. But now, for example, we can add a change here using HSL, and I can click with the selection tool here on just the orange. And you'll notice that I'm making a very targeted adjustment to just the orange. It's both masked, and it's using the HSL tool there, so I can start to refine that, making it more of a tangerine, for example, giving me a lot of flexibility. So this tool is very useful. Just select the layer and drag around what you want. And what it's going to try to do is make a basic selection. So notice here, it's going to allow you to make choices. Now, sometimes it gets it wrong, like it did there on the edge, a little bit tricky. So it's not going to always be perfect, but you can go ahead and find that as you use this, you can select multiple areas. Or if we drag through here and select all three oranges, notice how it analyzes and tries to find the right information. Now, I generally find that using a smaller selection, choosing them one at a time, is going to be more accurate, but I could hold down the Shift key there, and it will continue to grab them. There we go. Let's get that one there. And one more. Now, we'll add that HSL adjustment. Click on the On-Image tool, and click on the orange itself. Boosting the saturation, and darkening or lightening ever so slightly with a roll to the hue. And as you see there, we were able to make some very targeted selections, affecting just the oranges and the vegetation, so we can really drive that in and get the look that we wanted, effectively relighting our photo. Be sure to explore the Object Selection tool. You'll notice that you can actually change it as well from a rectangle to a lasso, and I Photoshop has useful commands that allow you to make selections based upon depth of field, or what's in focus. This can be useful, particularly when working with stylized shots or ones where you want to make a complex selection. Let's open up this before and after state here, and you'll see that we have a portrait shot on black, and then we came up with a new background for it. Now, in this case, you could, of course, try to make a selection. Using something like the Quick Selection tool, you could drag through, but as you see, it gets a little tricky around the hair. And what about the spaces here? And now it's eating into the logo and the edges of the paddle. It's just not very believable. Instead, we can rely upon focus. So if I say select focus area, and it will analyze, and we can see what's happening here. Let's take a look at this with black on white, and it did a pretty good job. I can paint here areas that I wanted to add, and it will evaluate those and fill them in. Additionally, let's view this on the image itself, and I see some stuff that should be removed. So we can come over here and paint, and it should remove those areas. There you see, it did a pretty nice job. Let's just paint a little more, and it evaluates. There we go. And it should cut in nicely. Now, it doesn't need to be perfect, because at this point, we can click the Select and Mask button. This is going to evaluate, and using the Smart Radius here, we can start to adjust this nicely. Getting pretty good there. Let's just paint along that edge, so it reevaluates. And we'll come in here as well and have it analyze that little gap. Now in this case, pretty complex selection and difficult because we have a black object and a black ore, but not too bad. I'll just paint over this edge one more time to clean up the edge of the paddle. And we'll adjust the Smart Radius here and the contrast. Now, when it looks pretty good, my suggestion is output this to a new layer with a layer mask. This will give you some flexibility for cleanup because you can zoom in and paint on that mask. What we can do is grab our paintbrush and just paint with white where we want to add to that mask. So the focus area has made this pretty minimal, especially since we're just going to be compositing this over a backdrop here. Let's just hold down the Shift key and click. Now I'll flip to black, and I can hold down the Shift key to click and take that little selection out. There we go. Nice and simple. Hold down the Shift key again and click, and you see it makes that. So this is pretty easy, and you can adjust the hardness of the brush to taste and just paint to add or subtract. And holding down the Shift key makes it simple to get those straight lines. So I'm just going to click there and hold down the Shift key, come down to the bottom of the paddle and click, and we've got a good edge. So that's nice. Let's take a look at the rest. Not bad. Everything looks good through there. The logos are good. And on the hair here, simple enough. We can just click back on that mask, and if we double click, we're right into it. And we can use the Smart Radius and Edge Detection there and just paint over the edges of the hair so it reanalyzes and recalculates. So that works nicely. Click OK, and the mask should update there. So we can throw this old one away. Now what I want to do is layer in a backdrop. So let's come to the bottom here, and we'll put in a solid color. And drag that behind. And let's select the color of the logo. Now what we can do is mix in other areas, such as a pattern for a fill. And we'll go with a water pattern here. I'll scale that up a little bit. And let's just rasterize that. And we can strip out the color. Now this will make it easy to mix that in with the layer down below. Like so. And we get a nice textured layer. Now what we're going to do is add a little bit of gradation. So we'll put in a gradient from top to bottom and just use that simple gradient there to add some darkness. We can mix that in as well. Let's go with multiply there. And it creates a nice gentle blend. And I'm even going to duplicate that layer and put it above the photograph here at a lower opacity. This way, we'll get a little bit of shadow inching up the bottom of the photo to draw our eye to the top. As you see here, these complex selections allow you to easily remove and start to composite elements. Being able to make a selection based on focus sped things up here and allowed us to grab the subject, even when it was a relatively dark area on a dark background. All right, the image is looking pretty solid. Let's finish this out and add just another gradient. In this case, we'll place a radial gradient and reverse this. Adjust the scale and place it over the subject. Now we have a nice little fall off to the edges, and it draws our eye into the face. Photoshop offers many different selection tools. The one that Photoshop has recently started to add some AI-powered filters. The use of artificial intelligence can automate certain steps or make recommendations. Now, I first want to show you how to access these. They're a bit experimental, and depending upon when you watch this video, they may have further evolved, or there might be some changes to the offering. But let me show you the core way of accessing this data. I'm going to open up some images here, and I'll start with my ones labeled as Start. We'll just select all of these and bring them into Photoshop with a double click. I've provided the end states in case you want to reference them. Now what we're going to do is invoke these tools. If I go to the filter menu, you'll see near the top neural filters. This is going to open up the image and a new panel for the neural filters. Now with this, you're going to see a few things at play. First up, you'll notice that the filters aren't actually loaded when you start. You need to download these. Because they're experimental and constantly being updated right now, Adobe hasn't baked them in. They don't want you to wait for an update to the application just so they can update the filter. These tools are sort of in a public preview stage as a way of thinking of it. So if I want to use one of these, I need to click Download. And it pulls down that filter. And here's the Style Transfer plugin. And it downloads. Now this one's a lot longer to download because it has a lot of art representation in it. You'll show that in just a moment. What it does there is it allows you to transfer the look of one image to another. Now, while that's happening, I can also go here to another tab. This is the Experimental tab, and you'll see that some of these are in beta. So if you want to use one of these, you'll need to turn it on. If you haven't downloaded it yet, you'll need to click the Download button here so it pulls it down. And you'll see that some of these are labeled beta, and some of these are not labeled at all. If I click on one of these, you'll notice that you can't access these yet. Now, this will change over time, but what happens is these are in a closed beta, meaning Adobe wants you to apply to have access to them. So if you do a lot of photo restoration and you want to get access to their automatic cleanup one, you would just click I'm interested. And you can provide a reason for Adobe about the type of work you do and why you would like to be added to the beta program. There's no guarantee that asking will get you access, but Adobe is doing beta testing where people can use these tools and provide feedback as they finesse them. So what appears to happen is this. There's first the announced tools that use beta access that get initial feedback. Then there are tools labeled beta, which are in public beta that you can use. And then there are the regular neural tools that are released. So in any case, what happens here is I can enable a few of these, like colorize. And I could take a look at some of the others. Maybe I want to use the JPEG artifact cleanup. It's going to pull that down. So what you see here is that I currently have 5 filters activated. If you try to do other filters here, what's going to happen is this. You may encounter a limit. Notice that they are placed a limit that you can only use 5 tools at once for the AI. Now, why Adobe has this limit, I'm not positive. I think it's for performance issues, as well as the fact that they are using cloud data to transfer. Keep that in mind, that you need an internet connection to activate these and an active internet connection to use them. Adobe does do some data transfer. Now, they insist that they will keep your images secure and anonymous, but they are actually transferring it to their servers for some of the work. All right, you see that we've got some of these filters on, and I'm just going to turn Style Transfer off for now. We'll talk about these in a moment. But in general, the tools are able to work. You'll see that there's also a little tutorial here that might be helpful, and you can take a look at what it does. So if we zoom in, you'll see that skin smoothing is in play here. So if I want to, I can reset this here. And I'm going to take the blur all the way down. You'll notice here, without that, if we turn the skin smoothing all the way off, you see that there are some issues in his skin and his texture. When we turn the skin smoothing on, notice how it analyzes the image and attempts to smooth out some of those details. So even with the value of 0 and 0, it is applying an enhancement. You could then play with the overall smoothing, as well as blurring in this case, if I want to take out some of these wrinkles and a little bit of the acne. Be careful as you crank this up so that it doesn't overprocess or make things look too smooth. But you can see it there, and if we toggle it off and then back on, you'll see the change. Now that carefulness with overprocessing, look at some of these curves here in his face, where his smile is. If I overprocess that, some of those are getting a little bit too smoothed over. So this is why you're going to want to play with the blur and smoothness amount to get the right value. People are not made out of plastic, so you don't want to be too aggressive here. When you're done using the filter, you Let's explore some of those neural filters in depth. We're only going to take a look at a couple of them, but you'll get a good idea of what they can do, and then you can explore the rest on your own. To start, I'll go back in and invoke the neural filter interface. This brings it up, and by default, you'll see that all the tools are disabled. What I'm going to do now is take a look at two of the portrait ones here. So let's work with this, and we'll start with a little bit of skin smoothing. Now, in this case, we have just the skin smoothing turned on, and you can see that change before and after. Again, as we mentioned in the previous lesson, be careful not to overdo things. The next area is the Smart Portrait, and I'm going to enable this as well. Now, with this tool, what you're going to see is that they offer a wide range of options. Some of these are very subtle, and what's a bit strange about this is it actually manipulates your subject. This is fun to use, but be careful to not overuse it. So let me show you. It's actually going to generate new facial details. So if I feel my subject wasn't happy enough, I can move this slider and it's going to increase their happiness. Notice it takes a while to process, so this is not an interactive slider, but it's now going to generate him being 19% happier. And you see it actually crinkled the eyes and exposed the teeth. It doesn't know what our subject's teeth actually are. So if our subject had a gold tooth, it wouldn't know that. But it's going to generate teeth based upon an AI algorithm of what it thinks this person's face would look like. If we increase that even more, you'll see our subject gets even happier with a bigger smile and more closure in the eyes as they're starting to squint a little bit from their big smile. We can go the other way. So a negative happiness would be the same thing as saying a sadness slider. And now he's looking a bit frustrated versus very upset if we crank that all the way over to 50. Let's reset that there and turn that one off. Surprise is going to open up a little bit of excitement and widen the eyes a bit, and you see the change. And you can combine these. For example, we can have an angry and unhappy person. And what this is going to do is add anger, and it's pulled down. Now again, be careful with these. They're fun to play with, but what I would suggest is a subtle hand. So making somebody just a touch happier to curve up the lip. And you see that change there. Also, they offer other options here, such as gaze. This is designed that if your subject wasn't looking at the correct place, that you can actually move their eyes around inside of their eyelids there. So you can adjust it if they were looking slightly off camera. They also offer, for those of you who still have an abundance of hair thickness. And it's going to go through and fill some of that in. Again, at high values, it gets pretty comical, but you see the fact that barbershops are closed. In any case, be careful with these. You don't want to overdo them. But we can use some of the more useful ones like light direction here, and this is going to affect and relight the picture by moving the light in the scene and attempts to fill it in. So this can be a pretty useful tool. Okay, let's take a look at a couple more really quick. I'm going to click cancel here and show you the colorize option. This is going to attempt to colorize a black and white photo by adding in detail. So we'll come here to colorize and enable it. And what it's going to do is scan the scene and attempt to fill it in. You'll notice it did a pretty good job, but it wasn't perfect. It's certainly great and would save a lot of time, but it missed a few areas here, like the hand. So you can go back afterwards and touch that up. You can also drag the sliders here to sort of adjust the color balance if you feel like the mix wasn't quite right. But what you can do here is you can take the color tool and manually select something that you need, such as a skin tone here, or I could sample. Let's go just a little redder. And then you can come in and select parts of your image where you feel that was needed and then add it in more. You see there it's a bit forceful, so I'm going to back that off. In any case, this did a nice job of jump-starting the colorization process. And if I was in a hurry, this would certainly look good. But you can click the OK button and then in Photoshop continue to add to the few areas that need minor touch-up, but significantly shave off time in the process. Let's do one more here, and this is the style transfer. This is one of my favorites for graphic designers. What it's going to do is allow you to take a reference image and transfer that style to the new image. This is one of the other two that's not in beta. So you can see here the ability to click on a variety of artwork options. However, you'll notice that we don't currently have the ability to load our own style in. So I'm hoping that that's something that they'll add in the future. But notice you could take the style, such as a Van Gogh painting, and then decide whether or not the colors are transferred. You could preserve the original color or not. You can also tell it to focus a little bit more on the subject. You can adjust the size of the brush strokes and how strong this is. So a subtle look is often useful as a gentler sort of filter. And you can decide to soften the background a bit for the non-key areas so it draws the attention elsewhere. There's a wide range of choices in here, and each one of them is going to give you a different type of look or painting. Again, not a perfect tool, but an interesting idea that's going to continue to evolve. Hopefully, you'll get the ability to load up your own images in the future and see additional controls about how this is applied. But I do find that using this and choosing to focus on the subject and preserve the original color, that it becomes very useful as a way to stylize my image. With all the neural filters, you will also notice the ability here to control what happens. Does it put it out as a smart filter so it can be editable? Does it make a new layer? Or does it put on a new layer with a mask? This is up to you, and you can see that output there. That new layer with a mask would be great because maybe you want to brush back in some of the original pixels. Well, now you can do that and simply use your mask and use it to combine the different parts of the two photos together. In this case, I erased away some of the upper area, so it blended in nicely with the area down below. Let's do one more of these neural filters. And in this case, it's the haze. Haze is great for depth in the scene. So this is depth aware haze. I'll enable it. And let's take a look at one other tool that relies upon artificial intelligence, and that's Photoshop's implementation of sky replacement. Sky replacement is a popular technique that's often used in travel photography and real estate photography, where people are not satisfied with the sky as is. Maybe you got up early in the morning and the sky just kind of fizzled out. Or you went to shoot a beautiful sunset and all you got was fog or haze. Well, we can go in and tweak this after the fact. Let's go here and open up an image. And I'm happy with this image. This is from a trip to Hong Kong recently. And the sky is bright blue and beautiful, but it's not very photographically interesting. What I can do is choose Edit and select Sky Replacement. This brings up a new dialog in Photoshop, allowing you to make a change. What you're going to want to do is click here and audition some of the skies. You'll see lots of different options. Now, Adobe is simply layering these in the background. So you notice it's just compositing it in the background layer. What it doesn't do is any sort of transform or 3D positioning, but I am free to select different types of images. Let's choose one here that's a little bit more colorized that gives us a bit more drama than a plain bright blue sky. You can see here lots of options to choose from, and you can click to create a new sky. This gives you the ability to load one in from your hard drive. Now, beyond that, when you're set here, you'll see the ability to also see the recent skies across the top. All right, what I'm going to do now is take a look at the basic controls. Let's zoom in here a little bit so we can better see the edges. By default, it automatically masks the edge of your subject. If you need to, you can shift that edge. This allows you to erode into the subject or expand it outward. Normally, you're not going to need to do this, or not more than just a few pixels. But if you're having edge problems, or maybe it's something with a really soft edge like a tree, this can allow you to finesse that. You can also use the Fade Edge command. So if this is turned on, you'll notice here, if we shift the edge with no fading, it's very hard. But if I expand it here and increase the fade, then it creates a very soft transition. I actually recommend you don't go quite as aggressive on the fade and you just use a small amount of shifting. This will allow you to clean up that edge. The next section, Sky Adjustments, lets you adjust the sky to match the scene. So you can adjust the exposure of that sky, as well as shift the color temperature warmer or cooler. Scale lets you adjust the overall size, and you can flip the sky as needed if there was something like a lighting source back there and you needed to adjust so it matched the lighting of your photo. The next section here is the foreground adjustment. This allows you to change how the lighting is going to affect the scene. There's two lighting modes. Multiply adds color and screen lightens. So as we adjust the lighting here, you can see that we can brighten up the object or effectively darken the object by the sky. In this case, I think the sky should be lightening the object a little bit, but I'm not going to be quite as aggressive. I can also have it transfer some of its color so the color starts to match the new sky. So if I switch to a blue sky, you'll see how the color shifts a little bit to match. So with each of these changes, it's trying to match the scene so it's a better overall composite. When you're all done, you can output to new layers or a duplicate layer. Duplicate layer flattens the filter. New layers is going to produce a layered stack. So now if I choose that option, you'll notice a few things. Let's go ahead and close this here. It's generated a series of layers. The first one is shifting the object. The next is creating the lighting change and the sky change. You can see that those have masks on them as well. Then there's an adjustment layer for the sky, so you can go back afterwards and click if you need to. This will allow you to then change your mind afterwards for the brightness of the sky. Now, we're going to take a look at another sky adjustment plugin for replacement later. You can decide which one works best for you. What I like about this is it does have visual browsing and it's native to Photoshop. What I'm not crazy about is there are some subtleties that it's not doing that you'll see that another tool can do, like automatically positioning the background. But since things are on layers here, you are free to select your sky layer and transform it. So I could press Command-T for free transform, and this would allow me some flexibility. So maybe I want to adjust the perspective here a bit. You notice that I could tweak the sky so it's angled a little bit more to better match the angle of the photograph because we're looking up. This way, I could transform that sky so it's a little bit more in line with the scene. And you can also reposition it so it feels like it's a better match. But be careful with those repositions. You notice there that it pulled it up a bit too far. So you can always transform this and adjust, but pay attention to those edges as you manipulate. If you see any areas where it didn't do a good job, you are free to select the mask here and then use your paint tools. So for example, right here on this edge, it's close, but I see a little bit of the old sky peeking through. So I would select that mask, and my preference would be to use the smudge tool. And I'm going to tell it to push only the light pixels, and I'll use a low strength. Now what I could do is smudge that edge and push it. And so I'm pushing the matte and bleeding this edge over so that it's We're now going to take a look at two more artificial intelligence tools, Luminar AI and Aurora HDR. These are both made by Skylum software. They work as standalone applications and also serve as plugins to Photoshop, Lightroom, and Photos for macOS. I do provide some consulting services to this company to help make their products better, and I'd like to walk you through some of the benefits that these tools have. To start, I need to add some photos. You can do that by clicking the plus button and add a folder or edit single images. I'm going to add a whole folder. What I'll do now is navigate and select folder number 4 and add it. Luminar scans the folder and brings in all of the images. Now you'll see them there. Let's start with cropping. Now, cropping may sound easy to you. It's selectively composing your photograph. But the reality is lots of people struggle with cropping, not knowing what to crop or how to shape it. So Luminar AI introduced Composition AI, which not only crops, but allows you to fix perspective issues. So let's start here with a simple photograph, and we'll go to Edit, and I'm going to select Composition AI. With one click, it's going to analyze the image and make a suggestion. In this case, it feels a tighter crop would be warranted, and it places the key object more at the rule of thirds intersection point. I can also click to straighten the picture, and it estimates the horizon line and properly calculates it. Now, with the click of the return button, the new crop is applied. Let's press the arrow key and look at one that's a little more complex. In this case, I will choose Composition AI to get a recommended crop. And I like that. Now what I'm going to do is fix the vertical perspective. You'll see that we were a little off angle here, and there's some skew to the building. With one click, it fixes that and squares things up. Now, I like the composition, but I'm going to change it slightly just to balance this a little bit more. What I'm going to do here is force it so that those windows are centered between the frame. Composition is always subjective, but I do recommend and I like the tighter crop. I also like the verticals that it fixed. Now, with one more click, I've got a perfect level horizon. And so you can see that we did quite a bit of fixing there on the picture to remove unwanted perspective issues. Let's do one more. Here we have some different composition issues. I'm off to the side and I'm not expecting a perfectly level horizon, but you see there that it correctly detected the horizon line as opposed to the fact that we were shooting the road at an angle. And the vertical perspective there analyzes and made a very subtle fix to fix those verticals. So I like the tighter crop and everything that's there. If you want to, you can of course choose specific cropping ratios, and it will reframe as well. But use the Composition AI to start, and then you could choose from the recommended crops if you want to go with a different shape. In any case, Composition AI solves a Another addition to Luminar AI is the analysis that is given with templates. A template is a starting point, much like if you were using Canva or PowerPoint to build a presentation or a document. It's going to give you a place to begin. Luminar AI can recognize up to 7,000 different items in a photograph. Things like the content, is there water, is there vegetation, is there a sunset? And in doing so, can suggest editing presets. Normally, presets save people time, but the challenge is finding the right one, especially when you have a lot of them loaded. You could spend a lot of time searching through your system. Templates work this way. Navigate to a folder. In this case, I went to folder 42. And when I choose templates, it analyzes the content. You'll now see that it makes a suggestion. So here, it recommended natural skies. I can click and see different choices, such as morning dawn here with crack of dawn, morning dew. And you can see how it's applying a look. You can adjust these with the slider to dial in the strength. Now, let's go back to the top level. I can go to the next image, and it recommended both filmatic and nature. Well, I'm going to go with nature here, and I'll choose a nice one here like micro world, and it really brings out the sharpness of the object. With each of these, you are free, and for this photo, will analyze and come up with suggestions. And depending upon the image, you'll see different choices. You can scroll through and pick from these up top. And in this case, it recognized this as a waterscape and potentially overcast. Well, I'll go with waterscape and try cold currents. And I like that. Let's try silver flash. Well, that's a very classy black and white. Maybe I want to customize that though. So with one click, I move from templates to the edit controls. All the tools that were used have a dot next to them, making it easy to go in and refine things like accent to bring out the contrast, or structure there to get rich detail in the rocks. I can go down to the black and white mixer here, and I'm free to adjust that black and white. Maybe I want to change the water's intensity. And you see there by moving the blue and the cyan how I affect that, or go after the vegetation with the green slider. So nice and simple. And if you want to add, you can do that too. Maybe I want to put a little vignette there on my edge and feather that out. So what you're doing here is having the ability to modify the template. You're still free to use all of those other AI tools that you learned about. For example, I could adjust the straightness of the photo and fix the perspective, or go in and check my composition. And it's recommending a tighter crop there. Now, I like that, but I'm going to back that off just a little so it's not quite so aggressive. But I do think that the level was a nice addition. And there we have it. I can see the before and the after. If you need to tweak it, just click to go in, and we can move that past that edge of the rock, and it recomposes. Now, templates are built in and they're recommended, but you can make your own too. So if you just click here, you can save this as a template. You'll now find it in your templates collection under the My Collection and User Templates. You're now free to rename this. So I'll call One of the core benefits of Luminar AI is its ability to improve exposure in detail. They call this Enhance AI, and it uses artificial intelligence to analyze the image and fix color, tone, and exposure, effectively reducing the amount of work you have to do with 10 or 12 sliders down to one slider, and it's very selective. Let's start with 3 different photos. In this case, I'll open up the image and I'll go right to Edit with Enhance AI. No adjustments have been made to this image. With one slider, I can adjust the overall detail in the scene, balancing it out. I can also separately adjust and enhance the sky, adding color as I see fit, but it masks out the clouds as well. That's very powerful, and you can see there what a quick pop we made. Now let's go to an image that's not quite so well exposed. Notice here with Accent AI, it's able to balance out the exposure in the object, and Sky Enhancer can find the area of the sky even that's out of focus. This works really well on even the toughest of exposures. In this case, watch how much Accent AI can do to properly balance this scene and rescue details in both the overexposed areas and the underexposed areas. And Sky Enhancer can further go in and treat the sky. That worked great, and you can see how it even handled the fine edge of details there as we're adjusting the Sky Enhancer where the trees meet the sky. Now, in this case, you are still free to use the light tool. So if it's a grossly underexposed image, you might base up the exposure a little bit and play with the smart contrast. In this case, reducing contrast was actually better. And smart contrast is a very cool tool that, unlike a traditional contrast, lets you affect the contrast, but it does not change the color. So this works very nicely for that finesse. And you're still free, if you need to, with the local masking tool, to go in and brush in an area. So if I want to adjust this waterfall, for example, I could just paint over the waterfall here very easily, get a good general area, and then apply. Another component you often want to enhance in a scene is contrast and details. Now, most tools do this with a traditional contrast slider, which lightens and darkens parts of the photo or increases the difference between the light and dark areas. And they use a tool like Clarity, but these tools have a few drawbacks. Let me show you. Let's start with an image here, and let's go right into Edit. What I'll do first is take advantage of that Enhance tool you previously learned about. This is great at evening out the scene. Now, from the Light tool, I'll use Smart Contrast. This can add contrast or subtract it. In this case, subtracting contrast was actually better. Look at how it opened up some of those details in the shadows. Now what I'm going to do is come down to the Structure area. Structure can select detail in an image, and it selectively enhances the edge contrast. Notice there what a great job that does. If we look here at these areas, I'll zoom out just a little, pay attention to the reed mat here and the painting on the cup. No structure, with structure. And you can increase the intensity of the effect without taking up the amount so high. So this is strengthening the effect, and you see how that really brings out the texture there in the matte. This is more effective than Clarity because Clarity affects all areas and can create problems where it actually adds negative information into things like skin tones or can create halos or glowing edges. Let's press the arrow key and look at another image. And in this case, the exposure is pretty good. I could refine that a little bit with Enhance. I always like to start with Accent AI. You'll notice when you open up the image, it has to first decode the raw. When that scanning blue is over, you'll see the actual raw data now loaded. Luminar is a parametric editor. What that means is that all the effects you apply are constantly live, so that it goes back and if you apply new things, it recalculates the value. This gives you flexibility in editing, and it keeps the raw data accessible throughout the entire editing process. A tool like Photoshop works with raw, but then hands the raw data off as pixels for the more advanced tools. Luminar keeps everything raw the entire time. Let's go ahead here and just balance out that exposure with Accent. That worked out nicely. And now with Structure, notice how we can bring out some of the details. And I love how it's making those shadows and some of the reflections underneath more dramatic. Additionally, there's the Details area. This gives you separate control over different amounts. Small detail is going to be the really fine things like those rivets. Medium details here is more aggressive with the edges. And large details is going after those flat surfaces. Now, I don't like too much large details, but a little bit of sharpening and stronger medium and small details really helps. Look at that before and after, and how the painting and the writing just comes to life. That's really quite useful. And if you need to, if there is noise, you can go in and adjust some of the details protection and enable a little bit of denoise on top of that to clean things up. If we look at that before and after, you just see an incredible improvement. It's not that the photo was out of focus. It was tack sharp, shot on a tripod, and perfectly adjusted with autofocus. It's that the sensor and the decode leaves a little bit to be desired. So sharpening that really goes a long way, and you get a better looking photo. But what I like about this, and why Structure has an AI designation, is that it's smart enough to recognize human faces and not sharpen those. So here we go. Let's jump in, and we'll do the basic enhance. And now Structure. And as I increase Structure, notice how the background, her hair, is really popping. But what's not changing with Structure as we crank this up is the skin tone is not affected. Luminar is smart enough to recognize the human face and leave it alone. So as we are enhancing the hair in the background there and getting just great framing for her, we did not add extra texture or problems into the skin tone. In fact, and you're going to learn about this more later, Luminar can use that same face detection technology I'd like to show you a tool that Luminar provides for enhancing the skies. Now, you already saw the ability to enhance the existing sky, but you can add to the existing sky or even replace it. This really comes in handy for things like real estate photography and travel photography. Let's take a look here at this New York skyline, and I'll open up the image. What we're going to do is jump on into Edit, and we'll go over to the Creative section, where you'll see Sky AI and Augmented Sky. Augmented Sky lets you use a collection of built-in objects, or you can load your own PNG files or images that are white on black. And what it allows you to do is add objects to the sky. You can control the amount and color balance it to match and freely move it around. And notice how it automatically masked out the objects. So if I want to put some different clouds in there to change the day, I can layer these in. And there's a collection included to get you started. There's others available, and you can also use your own. But as you see, it automatically handles the masking. So as we position this object, it knows where the horizon is. It knows everything else. If for some reason you need to, under the advanced settings, you are free to defocus that object if it's in the background, flip it, as well as refine the edges with the mask refinement slider if needed. In this case, I'm going to tone that down a little bit again, and you see how it cleans up that reflected surface on the building. I'm impressed that it knows the difference between the blue sky and the blue reflected on the surface of the building. Really pretty impressive there how it handles that. Well, that's the augmented sky option, and that works really well to enhance the sky that you have. But maybe the sky that you have is really boring or doesn't match your needs. Well, you could replace it altogether. That's under Sky AI. And again, there's a collection of custom skies here. You can also load your own or even access a folder to permanently load them, and they'll appear in this menu. Now we can do things like change the sky. And not only does it position the sky, but it matches the alignment of the horizon. So if I decide to relight the scene, notice how it picks up the color of the sky and transfers it to the scene. So if it's a sunset, it's picking up those warm tones throughout the image. If it's a bright blue sky, it's able to match that, and it matches the lighting in the scene. You can use the Sky Global slider if you need to refine the edges to push in, and under the advanced settings, you'll see a few other adjustments to clean up your edges, but in general, the edges are handled very intelligently. Even complex areas here like this, where there's partial transparency in the roof, it was able to detect. And if we go on over here, you'll see that we had a crane, and it was able to detect that and clean it up. Now, you can control that and use your close gaps feature if you need to refine that or adjust the overall strength there. So you see there, if I get more or less aggressive, what happens. But this can be useful if you need to refine. Let's go ahead and reset, and we'll just zoom back out, and I'm going to show you how I can load my own sky. So I'll choose Load Custom Sky Image. Now I can navigate to any JPEG or TIFF that I have, and just select it. And it loads it in, putting it into the scene. We can adjust the relighting amount, and even smoothly blend the horizon for a gentle transition. You can also shift that if the horizon wasn't correct, and you'll notice how it scales and matches the horizon. Where this gets impressive, though, is when you synchronize this across different images. Adjustments sync. You'll notice on the tighter shot here, it was able to adjust it and reposition it to better fit. And you'll see there how it pulled it in. Remember, if need be, you can go in and play with the sky global slider. This will control how aggressive it is. So in the case here of the mirrored buildings, you have to decide if you wanted to push through a little bit to look like a reflection or back it off. But in this case, I'll just take that a little lower with a higher relight, and you can see what a great job it did of blending that into the scene. You can go ahead and finesse that there with those two sliders, or even flip it to take it from the other direction. But all in all, a very impressive tool. So feel free to experiment with that, but you'll see that this gives you the ability to change the background in the sky, and it can recognize a wide range of subjects. Sometimes as you work with images, there may be no sky to enhance. Maybe it was a really clear day or a really overcast one, and the sky is just boring. Well, thanks to the AI Sky Enhancer, we can target the sky using similar technology that was in place with Sky Enhancer, but completely swap it out with a new sky. Let me show you. Let's start with this image here that has both in focus and out of focus areas. And I'll switch to the Edit tab and choose Creative. From the AI Sky Replacement, I can choose from a variety of built-in skies. You'll see as we pick each one, it's going to change the sky that's there. And even the out of focus areas, the soft transition here on the railing is handled correctly. You see with each change, it automatically adjusts. Now in this case, we use blue sky number 4. And what you'll notice is that the angle and the alignment to the horizon has been properly handled. Let's pick a different image for a moment, and you'll see when we choose the same blue sky number 4, that it automatically scales and picks up on different details of the photograph, making it have a different look here as it correctly composites. Now, one of the things that I like is that we can adjust the Relight Scene command. This will take the color of the new sky and easily apply it. So, if we go with something like a sunset image, you'll see that it starts to pick up that new color. We also, using the advanced controls here, can play with options for Sky Global and Sky Local so that we don't add too much transparency. In this case, I want to minimize so that this just picks up the reflections, but doesn't become transparent because of the strong blue sky reflected in it. If we toggle that on and off, you see that the new sky is easily composited in and the color matches. Let's choose one more image here and try something a little different. This time, I'm going to load my own sky. So I could just choose Load Custom Sky Image. Now I simply need to navigate to the folder and select a JPEG. All you'll want to do is crop it so it has a straight horizon. You can use any JPEG file that you have or download stock images that you have the rights to. You see that it automatically angles and adjusts it to the scene. I'm going to use the Relight option here and take advantage of some other options under Advanced like Flip Sky, which allows me to change the direction. I actually think that looks a bit better. Let's put a little blend on the horizon there, as well as tweak the position. And you see we can move that up or down, and it smoothly composites. Now, what's really quite amazing about this is how well it's handling the complex areas. If you look over here to things like the crane, you see that it correctly handled the advanced transparency as well as the gaps in between the buildings. Now, once you have this basic element composited, just switch back to the controls that you learned about earlier. You can use Accent AI to even things out, or even Sky Enhancer to enhance the sky that you've replaced. AI Structure, which we'll discover more in a moment, easily adds in depth and detail, particularly useful in a skyscape. That's looking really good. And as I take a look through here, I could take advantage of even changing the color temperature of the sky or its overall exposure to brighten it or darken it. Once satisfied, select the rest of the images and you could choose Adjustments, Sync. It will automatically go through and add in the new sky and blend it with the new photograph. It'll take a moment for each image to decode, but you'll see that it takes the new settings and easily applies them in. The use of details is very important to bring out the fine areas within a photograph. A lot of times this is done with clarity, but Luminar offers AI structure. It has the ability to automatically mask out certain areas like skin tones. Let's go to the details folder here and take a look at two different examples, both a portrait and a non-portrait. Using my Edit tab, I'll start with the Essentials category and dial in the correct exposure using AI Enhance. You see that the lighting is much more even. Now, AI Structure is going to better define the texture and the details in the photograph. Using an amount plus a boost, we can really start to define things. If we toggle that on and off, it becomes quite clear that the shadows and textures are a lot richer. Looking at things here like the rivets in the plane, you'll really see that this effect is quite useful. Now, once you've boosted that detail, you may want to come down here to Denoise and subtly remove a little bit of noise from the image if it's getting a bit noisy. The AI structure doesn't add any noise, but this particular image had a bit of noise to begin with because of lower light, so this works quite well. Then feel free to take advantage of any sharpening controls if you'd like to do further sharpening. If we look at the before and after on the image, you see a tremendous amount of clearer detail brought to life. But what's most interesting about this is how the tool can actually mask out people. It's not going to go after the skin tone area. So if I decide to add more detail into this portrait, you see that the skin tones are left alone, even though the backdrop is much stronger. Additionally, you can go with a negative value to defocus the background and then boost it even further. In this case, you'll notice that there's been minimal change to the portrait itself, and if we toggle that on and off, we just see a nice subtle effect there on the background. So whether you want to add or subtract, AI structure is quite useful in that it intelligently masks and goes after the areas that need it. You might be familiar with the concept of dehazing an image. Sometimes images have haze or environmental mist that reduces contrast. However, sometimes we want that, or even need to add it in to change the mood of a picture. Not all photos should be contrasty, particularly if you want to give them a certain feeling. So for this, we have Atmosphere AI. What Luminar is able to do is analyze the image and detect the amount of detail. It also does a 3D mapping of the scene. Now, on some cameras, you might be familiar with this on a smartphone. They have a LiDAR sensor where it can actually measure the depth of the scene by using a built-in sensor on the camera, so it knows how far away the objects are for things like background blur. So this 3D technology for depth mapping can be used to measure how far away things are in the scene for things like blurring or perspective. Let's just go ahead and quickly fix this. We'll use that Enhance AI technology to get the right exposure in the scene. And now from the Creative section, I'll go to Atmosphere AI. When I turn this on, you see it starts to add fog to the scene. And notice how it's starting to mask it based on the mountains. If I adjust the depth slider, it starts to move through the scene and wraps around the mountains. And you can see how it actually recognizes what's further or closer away. You can also adjust the lightness. If we try this in another scene, watch what happens. So in this case, I've got the fog, and it recognizes the background that's outside. So it knew that these pillars were closer to the camera than this tree was. And as I adjust the depth slider, it starts to fill the fog in and works in 3D space. Look at it rolling down the hall towards us. We can also do other types. So a layered fog is going to be more down towards the ground. And you see how that rolls across the horizon. And a mist is a softer one that tends to hang out more towards the top of the picture, whereas a haze is going to come a little bit more through the middle, and it brightens up the brighter areas of the photo. You can adjust the lightness of this effect, and it's meant to be subtle, but notice how it just changes the feeling in the scene, and this can be combined to change the time of day. You also learned how you can make other changes. So if I wanted to change this to be a sunset, for example, notice how we can layer that sunset in. And by using that atmospheric haze there, we can adjust the global atmospheric haze in the new sky and finesse it down here in the atmosphere. And you see that that rolls forward into the scene, creating a nice overall change. Let's go ahead here, take one more look. And now what we're going to do is you'll see the fog. There's the fog at the top. I'm going to put it now towards on the water. So what Luminar is doing with this depth mat is it's analyzed the scene, and it's able to estimate what's closer to the camera and further away. This means that this technology is not dependent upon your camera or a special sensor, but rather can be used on any image. It uses technology to try to calculate and determine what things are closer and what things are further away. And as you saw, it's able to then use that information to control where it comes in. So here it looks like the fog is rolling over the surface of the hills and wraps around the edges. So depending upon the image and the source material that you have, this can produce a very believable effect. And remember, it works great in conjunction with other technologies like sky replacement and structure AI, as well, of course, as enhance AI, which should be used on pretty much every photo. Let's take a look at some of the improvements Luminar can bring when working with the portrait. Let's go ahead here and open up a picture. It might appear upside down initially because of the DNG preview, but once the raw file is decoded, you'll see that it displays correctly. Now in this case, we can start with templates, and Luminar AI is going to analyze the image and make some suggestions if you want to jumpstart. For example, the Fashionista preview does color correction and a bunch of skin enhancements all at once. And if we take a look at that, I'll choose Edit, you can see a lot of changes were applied. But I'm going to reset this all the way back to the top so you can see these individual tools. Let's go here to the Portrait tools and go to the Skin technology. We'll talk about face a little later, and I'll press Command+ to zoom in. Notice on the skin here, we have some blemishes. So the Amount slider is designed to smooth over the skin with a technique that's similar to frequency separation. This allows you to blend the skin, and you can see that some of the ruddiness, as well as the unwanted areas where there's speckling, are smoothed over. But the core texture here is still preserved. You can still see some of those fine hairs there on his lip. You can still see the shadows of the nose. Shine removal is also useful in hot spots. So if we take a look here at his forehead, shine removal is just going to help tone that down a little bit. This image isn't too bad on the shine front. Additionally, the skin defects removal can look at the skin and find unwanted defects. So if we turn that on and off, you see what a great job it did of finding most of the acne and turning it off. But if you have an area like a mole that it thinks you want to keep, you can still choose to manually get rid of that. Just go under Essentials and choose Erase. Now what you could do is brush over any areas that you decide you also don't want. Then with one click, it will look at the surrounding texture and come up with new texture. In this case, it's going to remove those moles and take that back. So the Skin AI generally will leave things in like beauty marks, but goes after acne, and it'll go after things like scratches or minor cuts. But if there is a beauty mark or something you need to manually remove, you can use the Erase tool to do that. Okay, let's take a look at another image here, but first, the before and after. And you can see what a nice change that made, particularly if we zoom in here. Look at what a great job it did on cleaning up that skin. Let's go to the next image. And we'll use that same technology under Portrait. And with Skin AI, let's go ahead and take up the amount. You can see how some of that texture is smoothed over, particularly looking at some of the bridge of the nose there. And we can do a little bit of shine removal. Let's turn on the skin defects removal as well. And if we look at that, you can see that it really did a nice job there of picking up on some of those defects. Now, this is a little tricky here on the nose with the shadow. So if you decide that it was too aggressive, that's okay. Or you can go in and gently use a tool like Erase to brush that area back in. So if you like where it fixed the eyebrow area there and that little blemish there, but not there, you are free to gently paint in to bring back areas. So now if we look at our subject and the before and after, you'll see a nice improvement, particularly if we zoom in here and we have a little bit of a larger face. Notice how we've just smoothed over even the makeup to get a better look. And remember, if there's an area you don't want, or like in this case, there's a little crack in the makeup, this is where you can do touch up with the Erase tool. It is going to look at the surrounding pixels and generate new ones. And so it uses AI technology to match the surrounding areas and generate new pixels. This is very useful when you have a distinct blemish that needs to be removed. There we go. And you can see how it generated new skin texture there that naturally blends in. So a great way to retouch the skin to preserve the beauty that you're trying to bring out in your pictures. And you don't have to worry about being too aggressive with it. It tends to have a very natural look and preserves all the core skin texture. Besides the ability to enhance skin, Luminar provides a wide range of portrait enhancement tools that can go after all the different areas in a face. Let me show you some of those changes. First up, I'm going to continue working with the image we previously had open. You'll find it in folder 4.7. What I'm going to do here now is access the portrait tool in Face. Using the Face Light slider, I could gently add to the face, as well as bring out some of the eyes here. Watch the eye enhancer. It's going to sharpen the eyes, as well as the ability to thicken the eyebrows. So that just helped bring the eyes out nicely. I can also use iris flare, and it puts a little highlight on the bottom of the eyes, which works quite nice. So if we look at that, you'll see how we just made the eyes stand out nicely, as well as frame them with a good, proper eyebrow. Now, let's go to another image that has no adjustments applied. In this case, what we're going to do is some further facial enhancements. We'll go back here for him and do the skin enhancement first. So you saw Skin AI earlier. What I'll do is take out the shine and look at how it really reduces that hot spot, and we can finesse the overall skin smoothing. What I like there is it did not destroy those fine hairs in his mustache. Now let's switch over to Face AI. This allows us to make nice changes. What we can do here is go in and add that face light, gently filling things in. We can also enhance the eyes to really bring them out. And look at how it did a nice job of finding that. We can also brighten the whites of the eyes and take out the dark circles. And you can see there how it fills it in. Thicken the eyebrows a little bit. His are pretty thin, but it's still helping nicely. And I'm going to put a little flare on the bottom of his eye. I can also choose to replace the eye with a new iris. You could choose to match the current eye color by picking, and then adjust the visibility. If we toggle that on and off, you'll see that by picking a similar colored iris, you can really enhance the eye. This also opens up the option to experiment with eye color change, but generally speaking, I recommend matching the current eye and then using the iris visibility to mix the original colors and the new colors together, and then a little iris flare. That does a really nice job of bringing those eyes out and making them stand out in a good way. You'll also find the ability to adjust the redness and darkening of the lips, and if there's a smile, to whiten the teeth. So as you see there, we are able to do quite a bit of improvements very quickly. This allows us to really bring things to life. I'm going to tone down the eye enhancement. It was a little strong, but you can just see there what a fast and easy way that was to preserve a natural portrait and bring it to life. Now, I want to show you one more change, and that's Body AI. This is designed for contouring the human figure. It works on single portraits. Let's go back to folder 4.7 and that image we were working with. In this case, with Body AI, you have the flexibility to adjust things. So maybe you were at a bad angle, or maybe your lens was affecting things. What I can do here is go either direction, pulling in if needed, or in this case, I'm going to go a little bit negative just to expand those shoulders and make it a touch more powerful. Notice how it fills out the chest like she took a deep breath and it just pushes the shoulders back. You also can tighten up the abdomen if needed, although it doesn't look like it's needed in this case. So here I made a subtle adjustment of expanding the shoulders a little bit to fill that in. And you see what a natural job it did. While we're at it, let's use Composition AI as you learned about before. Improve the crop a little bit and straighten that horizon a little bit. It does have an angle by style. You can, of course, freely crop and rotate as needed. But in this case, there is a bit of an angle to the photo on purpose. So if you want to, you can square it up, but you'll see how that's not quite right. So I'm going to actually preserve that angle, but get a little bit more level to it. There we go. And if we look at the before and after, you see the subtle improvements that just make for a better portrait. In addition to enhancing skin, Luminar also offers some advanced controls to refine the portrait. There are many sliders here because it's broken down the different tasks into unique controls, but they're all easy to use as you don't have to make any selections. Let's switch to the Faces folder here, and we'll go to the Edit tab and choose our portrait tools. To start, we'll take advantage of AI Skin Enhancer, and we'll just apply a middle amount and the defects removal. If I toggle that on and off, you see that some of the blemishes on the face have been removed, and it's done a nice job of just evening out the skin tone. Now let's use Portrait Enhancer. One of the controls I really like is Face Light. It automatically finds the face and allows you to add light to the scene. You'll notice that it's very well targeted and it doesn't fall on the backdrop at all. So a little lift to the face there helps bring it out. There's no red eye in this shot, but I can brighten the pupils of the eye to better frame the irises. Speaking of the irises, Eye Enhancer is going to bring out the color and sharpness of those eyes so they really come through. Dark circle removal can go after unwanted dark circles, although this particular photo doesn't suffer from this much. If you'd like, you can use Slim Face, and it will allow you to compensate for wide-angle lens distortion or an unflattering camera angle. We can also open up the eyes if the person is squinting. Don't overdo this, but a small amount can make them look a little bit more alert. If we toggle this on and off, you'll see that it just looks like a natural brightening and slight open to the eyes. The Eyebrow Improve can find the eyebrows and darken and thicken them. This particular gentleman has pretty thin eyebrows, so a little improvement there helps frame nicely. We can also change the saturation to bring out the intensity of the lips, make them redder, or darken them. And if there was a smile here, easily whiten the teeth. Now, if there is no smile, teeth whitening has no negative effect, so you don't have to worry about building it into one of your presets. If we toggle this on and off, you see a nice quick change. Let's zoom out here, and our photo is better exposed, with nicer looking skin and much better eyes. But even the finest details here in the beard has not been negatively affected. The tool automatically masks out the skin and separates it from the hair and pores so that you get a very natural look. You'll see there that it looks better and a nicer overall skin complexion, but no negative effect on those rich detailed hairs. These AI tools are just designed to speed things up. You can still use other tools to manually erase areas or to speed things up, but if you're looking to do a first pass or you're in a hurry, they're a tremendous time saver. And in all cases, they remove several steps from the total development time that you'll spend on a photograph. The next tool we're going to explore is Aurora HDR. HDR stands for High Dynamic Range, and it really emphasizes the differences between the lightest and darkest areas. Aurora can be run as a standalone application or as a plugin, and it works with tools like Photoshop, Lightroom, Aperture, and Photos for macOS. Let me show you how to enhance a single image by running it through the Quantum HDR process. In this case, I've got a single photograph selected. I can choose to drag this into Aurora or just send it. I'm going to select Open in Aurora HDR. This takes the image and hands it off. You can also just launch Aurora and choose File Open to do the same. It's going to analyze this single raw file and attempt to pull out maximum detail. From the settings icon here, you can also tell it to remove color noise and, if there's strong backlighting, chromatic aberration. Chromatic aberration is color fringing that you might see, particularly in areas of highest contrast. This results in green or purple fringe. This particular photograph doesn't have it, but you might see it on zoom lenses or if there is really strong backlighting. Let's go ahead and create the HDR image. It now analyzes the raw file and looks into all areas of it, both pulling up the exposure and down, trying to find the maximum detail within the full dynamic range within the raw file. Those areas are then masked together into a new composited image that maximizes the correct exposure. If we take a look at this and explore the before and after, you see that it did a tremendous job of correctly exposing the image. Additionally, if we zoom in, details have been enhanced in this image and it looks really sharp. I can clearly see the different birds there on the rock surface, and the water and highlights have really come through. Now, at this point, you have a choice. You can continue to work with the image in Aurora, taking advantage of presets here to creatively process your image or download more, or just do a basic development. Let's go ahead and explore the shadows and highlights really quick. I'll use Smart Tone to optimize the range here, and you see we can brighten or darken the image overall. And I like pulling it down ever so slightly. The benefit of Smart Tone is that the color doesn't shift. And now we can pop the white point and the black point slightly. If we turn on the clipping indicators there, we get a better idea if there's any crushed areas. I see a little bit of blue for pure black, so I could just lift those shadows up or not pull the black point down quite so far. But a little bit of black and pure white is okay in this photograph. That's looking really good. From the color area, I could take advantage of color contrast, and this is richer than vibrancy. It not only brings out the colors, but also increases the black point to make them richer. If we explore the before and after, you see a tremendous amount of restored detail. Let's go ahead and just pull those highlights down a little bit and lower the white point slightly. Looks good. And now when I'm done, I could just click and export this to an image. I tend to save this out as a high-quality 16-bit TIFF file. My suggestion is save it to the original location, and we'll save that in place. Once it's done, I can close the image and choose to save a native Aurora project file. This way I can return to make further edits if needed. Let's switch back to Luminar. And if we take a look at grid view, you'll see we have that processed image returned as well. You're now welcome to explore the other tools. For example, AI Accent can further enhance the image, and AI Structure can help better separate the depth there to really bring out the rock texture without negatively affecting the water. AI Structure does a great job of adding details into the water without producing a lot of noise or unwanted texture into the calm areas. If we toggle that off and on, you see that the shadows in the water and that ripple texture is much better defined now, but it still looks quite natural. That looks great. I'm just going to go over to Pro here and use the adjustable gradient and place that a little bit towards the bottom with a slight angle. And at the bottom here, I'm just going to back off the exposure and the color a little bit so that it makes it that the eye is naturally guided upwards. Let's finish that out with a vignette. We'll center our subject right there, dial in our vignette, and we can make it very soft and feathered and not quite so strong. And if we toggle that on and off, you see that the eye is really drawn to the point here and that so much depth and detail has been added. Let's compare that to the original file and the developed one. And as you see, the combination of the Quantum HDR engine, which used AI to enhance the detail from the raw file, and the additional techniques inside of Luminar has really brought this image to life, letting us see almost as much, if not more, than the human eye could at the time it was captured. The traditional use of HDR involves taking multiple exposures and merging those together. Most DSLR and mirrorless cameras can auto-bracket, which means the camera varies its exposure settings and keeps the other settings locked, such as depth of field. By making these changes to shutter speed, different areas are captured within the image. You'll notice here, for example, in the brightest photos, that some of the shadows are really lifted out. And then as we start to underexpose, key areas like the reflections are handled much better. Let's select this series of brackets, and I'll choose to open these in Aurora. You can also navigate to Aurora directly and just choose File Open to add all of the photographs. Once you've done so, you'll notice that it reads in information about the exposure settings. My suggestion is take advantage of auto alignment, and from the pop-up list here, if there was a lot of movement, you can also remove ghosts, which would be things like blowing flags or blowing trees. We don't have that problem here. Or chromatic aberration. When you're ready, click Create HDR. This takes a little bit of time as it has to open up each photograph, but all of that data is merged together into a new 32-bit image. A 32-bit file has much more information than the typical RAW file. RAW files usually capture 10 to 12 bits of information, so 32 bits is a tremendous amount of additional information to cover the shadows and the highlights, as well as the brightest exposure range. This gives you much more flexibility when dealing with tough lighting conditions or wide dynamic range situations like real estate interiors where there's windows or where there's a lot of information to see within the scene. You'll see now that Aurora has done a basic exposure, and if we toggle that on and off, a tremendous amount of information has been evened out. This scene was shot without any lights, and we can now see out the windows as well as all of the details in the room. The Smart Tone adjustment allows us to lighten or darken the shot overall. And if we turn on our clipping indicators here, we can continue to maximize things. I'm going to back the whites off ever so slightly, as well as the highlights, and lift the shadows a little more with a crisp black point. That's looking good. Now, using color contrast, we can restore a rich color. You'll notice that the scene itself really feels a bit dingy. That's because the white balance is off. So as I adjust the temperature and tint here, it gets to a closer white balance. You can also take the eyedropper and select to find a closer area so that you get the proper white point. Now with HDR Enhance, let's bring out the clarity, and you see that we have much better control between what's light and dark in the scene. If we toggle that on and off, it just looks like the scene has been evenly lit, and that really helps. You can continue to also add in additional structure, which emphasizes the texture, or microstructure for smaller details. HDR images also tend to have a bit of noise. This is particularly true since we combine multiple exposures, so I'll increase the denoise slightly. Once you feel like it's in the ballpark, just export out a high-quality TIFF image. The 16-bit TIFF file should be what you need, and we'll save that to the same folder. I'll call it Living Room. I also suggest that you capture the Aurora HDR file, so before you close it, be sure to save your work. And I'll save this to the same location as a native Aurora file. Now, I could switch back to Luminar, and you see that we have the developed image. Take advantage of the power of AI here. Using AI Enhance, I can easily use Accent to further even out the contrast and the exposure. Additionally, a little bit of AI Structure brings out those details. Now, in this case, I want to be careful because too much of the texture of the ceiling starts to look fake. So we'll just put a small amount of structure in with a gentle boost. And let's finish this off with a gentle vignette at the edges. And if we toggle that on and off, you see a subtle improvement that goes a long way. We have a sharp image with rich color and detail. To learn more about HDR, be sure to check out some of the other courses that I've recorded. This is an excellent technique for both landscape photography and real estate to really bring out all of the details that are in a scene. Oftentimes, the lighting conditions are more than what a camera can handle with a single exposure, so the use of HDR goes a long way. And thanks to the Quantum HDR engine, it's very easy to get natural-looking photographs that don't have an overly processed look that many associate with HDR photography. Perfectly Clear is one of the earliest adopters of automated technology to enhance images. It's widely used in photo labs, but can also be used as an application and as a plugin to popular image editors. Let's start with a perfect exposure. This is one of the core to getting a good image. In this case, I have two photographs ready, and I'm going to open up both of these Photoshop documents. Let's start with our landscape photograph here. Before running a Photoshop filter, I'll convert for smart filters. This means that any filter I apply is non-destructive and can be refined. I'll now choose Filter, Athentech Imaging, Perfectly Clear. Now, I can explore a variety of presets here. And you see that each of these quickly enhances the image. If we click, we see the before and after. Let's explore the perfect exposure technology here under Tone. In this case, since there isn't a face, I'll turn off face-aware exposure. And I can use a preset for low, medium, or high, which analyzes the image. Additionally, you can override this by dragging, and you'll notice that the exposure is adjusted without a shift in color. This is quite powerful, as most tools can't make this change. Additionally, we can use the black point here to raise or lower the black point, and the same with depth. Depth is going to increase the perception of black to make it richer, and we can use higher contrast or higher depth. The skin or depth bias further emphasizes this, allowing us to have more detail in the photograph, and if we click, you see the evening to the exposure. Let's zoom in here a little bit, and if I click and hold, you see our change. Now, we could take advantage of color. Color Restore is going to analyze the existing color in the image and bring more of it out. Again, it just does a very natural job of restoring the full color. That looks quite good. And taking a look here at details, I see a little bit of sharpening has been applied. That's quite normal for most photographs. We don't need to worry about skin or eyes. We'll explore those later. And so if I click and hold, I see the original, and release, I see the new one. When satisfied, when I click Apply, the results are returned to Photoshop. And if we toggle that on and off, you see that we've got the even exposure. Now let's try another example, this time with a face. One of the things that Athentech does well is it's able to recognize faces in an image. When we run this, it'll auto-detect key aspects. If for any reason it can't find the face, you can go ahead and manually add that, but I see that it found the face and the eyes. Now, as I use the exposure controls, we'll take advantage of face-aware exposure, and if I turn that on, it's going to favor the face when it calculates the correct exposure. If we look at that there, you see that the face is properly exposed, and that drives everything else. It's able to keep the face at the correct exposure and more aggressively go after other areas. Remember, depth and skin bias is also quite useful so that we can even out the exposure there to get good-looking skin. In this case, the image is richer with the correct exposure overall, but the skin tones have been handled correctly. Let's bring out a little bit of color restore and fidelity, which is quite useful for rich colors like greens. You see there, if we toggle that on and off, that the greens in the image and the pinks have been handled a little bit better, and we've got a better overall exposure and color. When I click Apply, the results are returned to Photoshop. This technology for auto color and exposure can be used as a refinement pass when you're getting ready to finish an image, or it can be used for batch processing. A lot of photo labs will use these basic settings to ensure that hundreds, if not thousands of pictures at a time are correctly exposed with accurate color. Let's take advantage of enhancing skin with Perfectly Clear. It's going to automatically find the faces in the picture and allow us to go in and quickly make changes to improve the overall skin tone as well as remove blemishes. Before we apply the filter, if you're using this in Photoshop, I suggest Convert for Smart Filters. Perfectly Clear can also be used with tools like Lightroom or as a standalone application. You'll see that it found the face automatically. Let's zoom in. My suggestion is 50 or 100% so you can better judge the skin. Let's turn off the other controls here by clicking on the dot and just explore skin. Now, under the skin controls, I'm going to turn everything off and re-enable them one at a time. First, we'll start with Perfectly Smooth. This allows us to smooth out blemishes in the skin and remove some of the unwanted texture. We can choose to do the face or the whole body, and it will look at areas like neck, hands, and arms. We can also choose an aggressive amount with Super Smooth, Default, or Subtle to control the intensity of the effect. Blemish removal is going to look for unwanted areas such as acne or bumps in the skin. If I toggle this on and off, you see that it's evened out some of the harsh shadows here on the nose and taken care of these small blemishes here on the face, right in this area here. Infrared removal is going to look for hot spots that are picked up by the camera or areas of heat and tone them down. And shine removal looks at bright areas and evens them out. If we toggle that on and off, you see that some of the overexposed areas and the oily skin are smoothed out nicely. Once you've got the skin where you want it, feel free to take advantage of the other tools in here. For example, with tone, we can easily use face-aware exposure and apply a small adjustment to the image just to even things out. If we zoom out now and take a look at the before and after, we see better overall exposure and a nice improvement to the skin. I'll click Apply, and the results are returned to the Photoshop layer. Besides the ability to enhance skin, Perfectly Clear also offers other tools that you can use to refine a portrait. Let's open up an image here, and we'll send this as an object to Photoshop. This is the raw file being handed off. it's turned into a smart object here, and that's an option in the open dialog for the raw file. Otherwise, you could choose Filter, Convert for Smart Filters. Let's apply Perfectly Clear. You'll see that the face is automatically recognized and that it attempts to apply basic exposure for tone. We'll use the Face Aware option there and balance out the black point and the depth. We're using the same skin settings from before, but you can tweak these based on the knowledge you have, and you see that that shine removal and blemish removal has evened things out well. Let's back that off a little bit so it's not quite so intense. And that looks natural. Now we'll start with the eyes. Let's enable that group there. There's no need for red eye, so I can disable. But Eye Enhance is going to sharpen the eyes and brighten them. Dark circles will remove the dark circles from under the eye. If we toggle that on and off, you'll see that the dark circles have been removed and the eyes have been sharpened. Let's back that off so neither is quite as strong. Now we have a little sharpening to the eyes and a gentle removal of some of the dark circles. Eye Enlarge can be used to open the eyes slightly if the person is squinting under bright light. And Catch Lights can actually put additional reflections into the eyes, simulating traditional photographic techniques so we can create a little highlight in the eyes. I'm going to turn that off in this case because there's already a catch light. Now the face controls allow for contouring. Contouring can go ahead and thin the face slightly or can be quite dramatic. In this case, we're just going to go with a very small amount to compensate for the wider angle lens. I can also use teeth whitening to target the teeth and brighten them up slightly, and lip sharpening if I want to bring out the texture in the lips. Although in this case, I'm going to leave it off and just keep them looking more natural. That looks good. And if we toggle that on and off, you see a nice overall evening to the face, removal of the dark circles, and sharpening of the eyes. Let's go ahead and click Apply, and the results are returned to the Photoshop Smart Object. Perfectly Clear includes some basic tools for digital makeup. These can be useful after you've applied skin enhancement or eye enhancement and you want to just bring out the cheeks a little bit for better framing or adjust the skin tone complexion. Let me show you. In this case, we have a Photoshop file open and it's already got a smart object. Let's apply Perfectly Clear. We have some of the same settings as we've used previously, a little bit of tone, the face has been found, and if we take a look, we're doing a basic enhancement to the eyes here. If I click, you see that the eyes are slightly opened, the dark circles have been removed quite naturally here under the eyes, and the face and skin has been smoothed. Let's go with the full body here and bump that up just a little bit with stronger blemish removal to remove some of the acne and small blemishes on the face. Now we can take advantage of makeup. We'll turn on skin toning here and we could apply it to either the face or the whole body. If we take a look at the swatches, you'll see that there are different settings here. These match typical makeup foundations that are widely used. And we can warm, tan, or add base foundation. And as we make this change here, you'll see that it affects the skin tone. Let's bump this up a bit stronger. And we'll go with warming here for a moment. And you see that it tans the skin. Let's go with a stronger tan, and it's even stronger. Now, the 100 is way too strong, so we're going to back that off and just go with a gentle warm. But what this has done is added a little bit of skin toning here to just bring out the warmth in the skin, allowing for a nice recovery. If we look at this here, her overall skin tones are warmer and quite natural, but it's brought out some of the gentle redness. Before and after, evening things out nicely on the body. We could additionally take a look here at blush, and this is going to add color into the cheeks. You'll see similarly swatches, or you could adjust these by hand. If we click, you'll find the popular colors available here as digital makeup, and you can add these into the cheeks. Let's go with a little bit of a brown. There we go. And just a small amount. If we toggle this on and off, you'll see that her complexion has been darkened slightly and that the cheeks are brought out gently. With the overall change, the image still looks natural, but the skin has been nicely smoothed, the dark shadows removed, and the overall exposure brought to life. While we're at it, let's go ahead and enable a graduated filter. There we go. And on the outside here, I'm just going to darken that down a bit, adding a very subtle vignette. Good. Looks good. And we can click Apply. The resulting image is updated in Photoshop, and you see that the makeup controls and other enhancements have been applied, making for a nice overall, yet subtle change. Notice how the acne has been removed. The skin tones have been evened out, and we have a little bit of gentle color being applied to the cheeks. Topaz has a series of tools that incorporate AI into your workflow. In this case, machine learning has trained the software to make better decisions to speed things up. We're going to start with Gigapixel AI, which is designed for up-resing images. A lot of times you might have historical images, scans, or low-quality JPEGs, and you can't access the high-quality originals. This can make it difficult to use these in projects or to further enhance them. But with Gigapixel, you could pre-process the images and make them larger. Unlike traditional tools that use interpolation, this relies upon machine learning to create the new pixels. It doesn't just double or quadruple the pixels, it creates new pixels based upon information and best guesses. I've got two images here, and I'll select them and choose to open this with Gigapixel. Now, this tutorial on Startup will walk you through what it's doing, but effectively it's analyzing the image to create new content. So I'll reopen those and let it analyze the files. What you'll see is a preview here. It takes a little bit of time, but it's attempting to sharpen and add in detail. Let's go up to the bird's eye here. And you see that it's created new pixels that are also pretty sharp. Now, you've got a few options here, but typically what you're going to want to do is stick with one of these straight, simple math. 2x, 4x, etc. You can also enter in a custom size if you want, but I find you get best results by sticking with one of these pre-size amounts. The auto option is going to just analyze the image and create new content. But you can go ahead and take a manual setting here, and in this case, since there's a lot of noise in the image, I can decide to suppress the noise, and it's going to remove that. You can also be more aggressive with the blur removal if you want for a sharper photograph. If there's pictures that have faces, be sure to take advantage of face refinement, although this particular image does not, since these are human faces it's looking for. You then decide where these go. I'm going to save it back to the source folder for now, and it will automatically add the extension Gigapixel. If you want, you can convert the file formats so we can go from the lossy JPEG file to a higher quality 16-bit TIFF file. You also can create other files here, and if this was a RAW file, you could output a new DNG. Feel free to take advantage of the higher quality 16-bit, but I do suggest maintaining the current color profile for accuracy. Now when you're ready, you can click Start. The process is a bit time-intensive. It has to go through and analyze all of the pixels. So, depending upon the speed of your computer and the speed of your hard drive, as well as the original resolution, this may take a few minutes. Let's let it finish. Now that the images are done, we can click and it will open up that file. Here's the enlarged image. And as we zoom in, you see that it's held up quite nicely. Let's compare that to the original. In this case, if we zoom in to a similar composition, you see that the image goes very soft. Let's pull these apart for a second. And what you're seeing on the top here is the original compared to the enhanced version. Look at the detail around the eye and the face. This is a technology that I'm really quite impressed with, and it does an excellent job on sizing. Not every image is handled perfectly, but it's really come a long way. Let's take a look at the other image we enhanced. In this case, a landscape image. And here's our original. We'll zoom in and take a look at some of the details. And here's our enhanced. And as you can see, it's done a nice job of pulling out the details. Now, certain areas, for example, these cars here, have a few artifacts. You notice that this car hood looks a little dented. If we look at the original here, it's hard to tell what was there. So, in some cases, it's not perfect, but it's still brought out quite a bit of detail. Notice how this car is just effectively a blob, and comparatively, it really found quite a bit and was able to unleash that. As we take a look at the image as a whole here, let's put these two side by side. And you'll see with similar compositions that quite a bit more has really been brought out. If we take a look at that metal texture there, you see the original and the new one, and just quite a bit more detail. Look at those rivets. And here, so much softer. So we're able to really bring things out with AI Gigapixel, and it's an excellent tool for resizing. This can really come in handy if you need to do print output or if you're dealing with low quality sources. It is a bit time consuming and only runs as a standalone application, but it does support batch processing. Additionally, if you don't get perfect results, be sure to experiment with the settings and run it again. I find that a little bit of tweaking can warrant different results. Topaz offers Sharpen AI, which works as both a plugin and a standalone application. It can find details in an image and really bring them out. Let's take a look at an image here that's pretty detailed to begin with, and we have rich texture. But if we look at the feathers here, it's not quite as sharp as I would like, particularly around the eye here. I see a little bit of softening in the detail because of the moving subject. Let's convert this for smart filters so that filters are non-destructive. And I can now invoke Sharpen AI. It takes a moment to analyze the image, and then it will give us controls. Let's go ahead and close the tutorial. And I see what's happening in the photograph. Let's zoom to 200% and really go up to that eye area. If I take a look here at the original, I see quite a bit of softness. When I turn that back off, look at how the feathers and the eye are really coming through, the fine details in the beak. Now, the noise suppression option is useful to remove noise in a photograph. This particular image doesn't have it, so I'm going to take that down a bit so it doesn't soften the image much. And we can also put in a little bit of grain so that the image has a more photographic quality. That looks good. Remove blur is useful for getting rid of soft areas. Let's be a bit more aggressive there. That's really coming through nicely. Look at those fine details there on the feathers on the crown. Now, you'll notice that we can also adjust things such as sharpness, stabilization for a moving subject, or focus. Let's look at the different methods in action. In this case, the subject is not moving, so I don't expect stabilize to be the best result. Let's try focus, however, and that looks pretty good. If we look at the original compared to the new one, it's not that the image was terribly out of focus, but the little extra detail boost there sure helps. When you're satisfied, click the Apply button, and it will send the results back to Photoshop. Remember, you can also use this as a standalone application as well. There we go. And if I toggle this on and off, while it's subtle, you'll definitely see a change and an improvement. Look particularly at these fine little details of feathers and the texture around the eye, and it really comes through nicely. There's the before and the after. Let's zoom back out to 100% magnification, and it really comes through nicely. Noise can be caused in a camera for many reasons. One can be shooting at too high of an ISO, which bumps up the sensitivity of your camera sensor. Another could be heat or a malfunctioning camera, or shooting in really low light. But noise can also be removed relatively easily. In this case, I've got a pretty noisy image. My camera had a really high ISO setting, and you see just a tremendous amount of grain here in the photograph. Let's go ahead and convert for smart filters so that filters are non-destructive, and then turn on the Denoise filter. Denoise works as a Photoshop plugin or as a standalone application. And take a look at both the skin and the background. And that's really working nicely. The Auto Brighten preview is there so that if you're working with a really dark image, it gets brighter and easier to see. The Remove Noise slider gets pretty aggressive. Let's crank that up all the way, and you see that all the noise has been removed, but there's a bit of softening of details. Let's also increase sharpness and recover some of the details in the image. If I click Auto, it'll analyze the image and make suggestions, but I'm going to actually bump up sharpness and details and be a little bit more aggressive on the noise reduction. There's the before and the after. When I click Apply, the image updates. Now, images that have a lot of noise may also benefit from sharpening, so you can use the sharpness filter you learned about earlier. Do make sure, though, that you remove the noise before you sharpen. Let's go ahead here. Zoom in a little bit. That's helping. We'll suppress the noise a little bit more as we sharpen. Good. And I'll click Apply. And those two filters work together. If we look at the before and the after, you see a tremendous recovery of detail and removal of artifacts, while areas like the hair are still intact. Notice that the reflections and the metal texture are still there, but the distracting noise has been removed. It's not just for portraits either. Let's take a look at a landscape example here. You'll notice that the sky is fine, but in the rocks we have some noise mixing in with the texture of the rock. This is a tough scenario. In this case, we're going to go a little bit more subtle. Let's apply Denoise and click Auto. The sky looks good, but I'm most concerned about the rocks. In this case, I'm going to tell it to enhance the sharpness and recover detail at a very high amount. That looks good. There's the original and after. A small reduction in noise with some additional sharpening. When I click Apply, the image updates. Now, if we look at the before and the after, it's very subtle, but some of the problematic noise areas have been minimized without destroying the texture of the rock or the trees. The key here is to use a lower value so that you don't add unwanted smoothing to other areas. But what's quite nice about this is it's able to automatically recognize certain areas that need more noise reduction than others and make sure that as it targets things like skies and skin tones, it doesn't overprocess. Most photographers know the benefit of RAW images, but you may find yourself not having access to RAW if you misconfigured your camera. Or maybe the camera you're using doesn't shoot RAW. Topaz offers a utility to attempt to create a DNG or digital negative from a high-quality JPEG. It's not as good as starting with the RAW file, but if you don't have access to the RAW file, it does create a nice intermediate file that you can further enhance and edit. Let's select these images here, and we'll choose to open these with JPEG to RAW AI. We'll just navigate to the files here and click Open. Now, what it's going to do is give you a preview area similar to Gigapixel. It's going to make automatic settings by default, but we can override this. If we take a look at Manual, you'll see the ability to further reduce JPEG artifacts if there's any compression artifacts or blockiness, as well as the ability to remove any camera blur. Additionally, you could choose the file format. You can go to a high-quality 16-bit TIFF file or create a DNG. Now, these DNG files are not going to have the same RAW recovery that you would find in the original RAW captured by the camera itself. But because they are getting out of the sRGB color space and moving away from an 8-bit compressed format, you do have greater flexibility to further post-process. This one looks good. Let's check the next one here. Looks nice and sharp. And we'll check out the bright highlights and shadows here. Looks good. So now I could just click Start, and those images are processed. Similar to the Gigapixel process, it has to analyze the data and then generate the new file. This will take about a minute per image, but may vary slightly depending upon the resolution and on the speed of your computer. Let's give this a moment to finish. Now that the images are done, let's open them up. I'm going to select all these images here inside Adobe Bridge and force them to open in Camera Raw. This will open both the DNG files and the JPEGs. Taking a look at the RAW file here, I'll click Auto and it evens things out. Notice that I can recover highlight detail as you'd expect. If we work with the JPEG file, we get similar performance, but not the same dynamic range because it's only an 8-bit file. So working with the RAW file is going to give you a little bit greater flexibility to recover highlights and really start to boost these different areas. Let's take advantage of texture there as well, and that's a nice overall exposure. If we take a look here, we can click Auto, let it analyze that, and again, refine the overall balance for shadows and highlights, recovering detail. Now, there's still quite a bit you could do with the JPEG file when you go to recover this, but you see there that it's not quite the same, that the RAW file just behaves a little bit better when it comes to refining the overall exposure because it's working with greater bit depth. So these DNG files are creating something from nothing, but with the power of AI, it's able to really refine that. Let's go ahead here and just lift up that exposure slightly, and then recover the black point, and bring down the white point. There we go. A little bit of texture. And you can see that quite a bit of detail was able to be brought out in that RAW file. Let's add a little clarity there. And if we take a look, we can put the before and after side by side. And working with the newly generated RAW file, I'm able to further develop the image and continue to enhance it. Topaz's Adjust AI is similar to AI Accent from Skylum and Athentech's Perfectly Clear technology for perfect exposure. What we can go ahead and do here is easily enhance color and detail in the image to get a proper balance. I've opened up a few images in Photoshop, but you can also use this as a standalone tool. Let's go ahead and apply Adjust AI. You'll find that a wealth of presets are offered, and many of these are creative in nature. These are going to create a more stylized image with different colors and such. And we'll just choose bright and detailed. If I click, you can see the before and after. And it's optimized exposure as well as detail there in the sky. Once you click Settings, you can go through and continue to refine, giving it an HDR style if you want more detail, or a standard strength here for the Adjust AI. You can also dial in the overall exposure, refine brightness and contrast. Let's bring back those highlights a little more. And the ability to shift color and add additional detail in for clarity. If you're going to do this, play with the clarity settings and then be sure to let it update. Let's zoom to 100% here so we can see that a little better. And this helps me better judge the clarity settings for accuracy. In this case, I see a little bit of artifacting and noise. So I'm going to tone down the large details and back off the sharpening a bit. There we go. Before and after. When satisfied, I just click the Apply button and it will update. Think of this as an auto enhancer that's designed to go after many different aspects of the photograph. Let's try another image here. In this case, we'll convert for smart filters and apply the filter again. This image is pretty dark. I'll choose the dark mood and go to Settings and lift up the overall exposure in the scene while maintaining contrast and keeping the black point rich. Let's zoom to 100% and you can toggle between the before and after. And you see it's done a nice job there, really bringing out the fine details in the image, giving us a nice overall lift in exposure, as well as several other adjustments. Let's go ahead and convert for smart filters again, and we'll run that from the top. Choose a setting that matches something close to what you'd like. And you'll find a wealth of options. Click Settings to customize, and you can dial in using this Develop module to really enhance the overall look of the image. A little bit of clarity goes a long way there to improve the separation from the background. And again, click Apply, and it updates. So, feel free to explore these different alternatives here as you're working with your images to add depth, detail, and color. If you need to extract an object from the background or blur the background, Topaz offers a tool for creating complex selections. Now, Photoshop has come a long way on this front, but Topaz is a useful tool that you may find a welcome addition to your toolkit. Let's see it in action. We'll start with a simple example here of a bird. And from the Filter menu, I can choose Topaz, Mask AI. There's two different technologies at play here. We can use contrast-based masking or AI. To speed things up, click the Auto button and have it detect the object. It'll attempt to find the key details. The red areas are meant to be cut away. The green areas are to be kept, and the blue area is a transition zone. In this case, it's close, but using the left bracket for a smaller brush, I'm going to have it analyze these feathers a little bit more because there's a lot of small divots. Holding down the spacebar, I can pan around, and I'm just having it look at the tips of the feathers in greater detail. Good. When I'm ready, I can click Compute Mask. It'll analyze the image and attempt to create transparency. Once it's done, you can continue to use the refinement tools as needed. For example, I see a little bit of blue left behind here, so I could paint over that area and tell it to reanalyze. And it's updating the mask and should clean up the edge. It did nicely. The benefit here is that even areas of partial transparency can be handled correctly. You can decide to paint on the masked preview area here, if needed, or on the image itself. And as long as Auto Update is checked, you'll see it reanalyzes and attempts to complete the mask. If you put too much, you can go ahead and just paint it back in, and these areas will be kept. And you see it regenerates the mask. Now, from the edge controls, this is where we can go ahead and further refine. Using edge softness, we can adjust the softness of that edge. We can shift it in or out to expand or contract, and recover parts of the foreground here to remove some of the color cast. From the Background tab, this allows you to blur the background, replace it with a color or an image, or leave it transparent. When I click Apply, it's going to automatically extract that and cuts the object out. You will notice that it is a destructive extraction, but it did do a nice job of removing and adding transparency. Let's try another example here. In this case, I'll choose to apply this. Let's invoke Mask AI, and it hands it off. If you don't run this as a Photoshop plugin, when you go to save, you can also choose to save out the black and white mask as its own image. We'll choose Auto here and have it detect the object. It didn't do too bad. Let's zoom in here and have a better look. And I see a few hairs I want it to analyze. So I'll paint over those stray hairs. There we go. And what we're attempting to do here is train it a bit by being more accurate where we paint and subtract. We're actually training the AI so it does a better job when we run this. I see here, for example, we need a smoother transition. There we go. And let's take a look in here. And I can just click over that area. And then when ready, choose Compute Mask, and it will analyze and come up. Now, if it's not accurate, remember, you can continue to add or subtract from the mask to refine this. There we go. Let's move around a bit. Not too bad. I need to remove a little bit there. So I can just paint right on that problem area. and you'll see that it updates and removes that area from the background. There we go. Then feel free to just continue to refine the transition area, and it will analyze the hair and recompute. If you see an area here where there should be transparency, just take a small brush and add a couple of strokes. You don't have to paint it all out. You'll notice that every time you click, you're teaching it what are good pixels and what are bad pixels. And it will attempt to reanalyze and smooth that transition out for a better look. This one's pretty tough here with the background, but not too bad. We'll just paint that area in and have it analyze those, and it creates a smoother blend. As we look at the rest of the hair, it did pretty well. Again, just paint over any areas that you want it to reanalyze, and it will do so. If it gets too much, just subtract, and it will remove it. By utilizing these technologies here, you can force it to reanalyze key areas. Hope you enjoyed this in-depth look at AI technology. Obviously, like all new things, it's going to continue to evolve and get better and better. But the huge improvements that we've already seen in just a few years' time are quite exciting. AI and machine learning have the ability to save you time and effort, allowing you to get more work done in less time. But as you see, most of these tools balance out control and allow you to still have your own input into the process. I think that AI is an important change to a photographer's workflow and is something that can really improve things. After all, the more you can get done in less time, the more profitable you can be. The more time you could spend on being creative. The more time you could spend working with your clients or exploring new ideas. Take advantage of AI, whether it's using new applications or new plugins, and you'll see a significant boost to your editing process.